Hello everyone. Sorry for the late start. There might be some technical difficulties tonight because of the weather. I know that YouTube took about 15 minutes to actually register that there was a connection with OBS, so that was fun. But I know that we have a lot of new people with us today, so welcome. This is actually a bit auspicious in that because of the whole doomer politics thing, I have been completely in the dark about the Professor Flowers controversy, so if you're new to the channel, you will actually have an opportunity to see me approach stuff fresh, and you'll get an idea of whether or not you like how I analyze things and whether or not it's worth it to stick around. So, yeah. We'll wait a couple minutes just for people to roll in, and then we'll get started. I may also be a bit low energy. I've been horribly tired all day long. Thank you, Levelhead. I appreciate that. Doomer politics. And as you'll continue to see, President Sunday continues to delay his streams with a disingenuous tactic of waiting for more and more people to join. Obvious bad faith move. It's definitely grifty. Alright. I wonder if Vosh is still playing Mario Sunshine. I thought he was playing Metroid Prime. I was all excited. Anyways. So, we're looking at, oh, it says it's talking with Professor Flowers. I was under the impression this was a debate. I don't think there's a moderator, though. I think it was just a back and forth. But apparently, she either promoted genocide as a possible procedure, or failed to condemn it, or was misconstrued by Vosh as doing one of those two things. And I have no clue which of those it is. So we're going to go through this and figure it out, hopefully, over the span of a few minutes. If anybody has any sources they think I should take a look at any point during this, let me know. I can't promise I will look at them, but it might help. How is the audio, by the way? Just before we begin, because I have a very long history of being dead silent for a solid 10 or so minutes, just talking to nobody, before realizing something is wrong. What are my favorite games? Dark Souls. Actually, let me, let's see. It's been a little while. Dark Souls, PlanetSide 2. I like horror games. So, Alien Isolation, Amnesia, Soma, stuff like that. Audio's good? Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any issues right now, so if this all goes belly up because of the technology, my apologies. A little quiet? There's always somebody who says it's a little quiet, and then everybody else says the audio is good. I think that might be a you thing. Soma's very good. Soma is my favorite frictional one. It might tie a little bit with Amnesia: The Dark Descent, but I think Soma's just tighter. But Alien Isolation is a lot more tense than either of them. I enjoyed the setting of Amnesia Rebirth, but the mechanics were just frustrating and took away from the experience. Oh yeah, Halo's good. I actually didn't dig Doom 2016 all that much. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of thing. See, I like horror games because they're mysteries with stakes, right? I like that. Like, that's one of the reasons why I like Dark Souls. Actually, Minecraft. I've basically built this empire in Minecraft on survival mode over the span of 3 years. My main base is expanded to something about the size of Minas Tirith. It's actually insane. I've wasted so many hours of my life. But, yeah, that's why I like Dark Souls and horror games, though, because I like that feeling you get when you've gone really, really deep somewhere and it's impossible to go back. That's why I liked Morrowind and I wasn't super fond of Skyrim or Oblivion. Have I played Pathologic 2? No. I've tried Pathologic 1. Apparently Pathologic 2 is a remake and I just couldn't get into that one. I might try it at some point. Alright. We've been dilly-dallying quite a bit, I think. When are we getting the Vosh map drop? What's the Vosh map? I have no idea. What have you done? It's okay. You can pick up the remote, it's okay. Alright. Anyways. Oh, Minecraft map. I'm still working on his likeness at like 100 blocks high. I'm waiting for the next update so the sky can be taller so I can make it, you know, the full scale that I want. I think you've been cast as a Vosh stan for not liking garbage critiques. I'm not a Vosh stan. I will admit I find Vosh to be a charming fellow. Like, you can talk to him. I think he's not nearly as bad as a lot of people make him out to be, but I've got issues with him. And I aired them to his face when I talked to him on stream. Not only that, but most of my initial subscribers were from critiques of him directly, and they're not critiques I've retracted. Now, some of them I've kept up for posterity just because, you know, it seems dishonest to remove them, especially now. But, and my, of course, as he has changed, my objections to him have changed, but I definitely still have criticisms for him. My primary issue, I'm not going to get into it because I'm dead tired, and if I say the wrong thing, it can cause trouble for me, but the short of it is my principal issue with the Vosh hit piece wasn't that it was, with Doomer Politics' Vosh video, wasn't that it was a massive criticism of Vosh, and it wasn't even that it was picked up by right-wingers, it's that it was spurious, and it attacked someone's character on dishonest grounds. So I just have an innate problem with that. It doesn't particularly matter who it is. I've defended other people in the past, granted I with far less exposure as a result, but this is just how I am, so I'm a little bit crazy that way. If I see people being cruel and predatory, I go into blood mode. That's about that. Yeah, exactly. Vosh is a Sunday stan. He's a plant. I've been playing a very long game. Vosh is a highly detailed, what's that called? What is it called when, like, somebody has, like, a CGI avatar? I can't remember. Do I think Vosh is good for the left? I don't know if he's bad for the left. I think the problem with Vosh principally is that he has a tendency to ridicule people who don't fall into a narrow range of positions, especially people who are critical, I guess in general terms, of the state form. And I mean, like, it kind of makes sense, because in a limited capacity, yeah, a non-reformist position within a system has, you know, limited potential unless it's under conditions of mass appeal or whatever, where you have, like, that actual material force to, you know, to brute force an actual structural change. Without that, it becomes extremely difficult. I think especially in the light of COVID, he can be sort of forgiven for really going hard on Biden versus, you know, a defiant Bernie or bust stance. But it's difficult to say. I think a lot of the radical critics of Vosh aren't particularly good for the left either. I think there's a big problem with people on this platform just not being responsible with what they say and being more interested in whether or not they know what they're doing, but being more interested in performatively knocking people down who appear to be their enemies. Like, there's almost something comparable to the the way in which, back in the day when, like, there was all that hubbub about, apologists having these widely publicized debates with famous atheist authors and scientists and whatnot, and you'd have these people just at each other's throats. It didn't really matter. I think there's something of that in the way people in this sphere sort of interact with each other. So, no, I don't think he's really bad for the left. I think he's less bad for the left, frankly, than people in the, what do you call it, like the DGG sphere? Like people in sort of Destiny's orbit? We're going to call it the blue camp. Vosh's camp is the red camp. I know some socialists are going to be angry at me for that. And Destiny's sphere is the blue camp. I think people in the blue camp tend to play a game of trying to... I'm speculating, but I think that recently they've been playing a game of courting right-wing viewerships, which are huge. Like if you look at Sargon of Akkad's subs, they're like 3 times that of Destiny. That's a lot of people. They've been trying to court them in a slippery way, not by actually affirming right-wing positions, but by attacking common enemies, so that signals to them, hey, we're your friends, you know? That kind of deal. What do I think of his debate with Maupin? I haven't seen that in a long time, and frankly, my position on all of this is so tentative. I remember thinking in that debate that Maupin looked like a salesman of some kind, and that was frustrating. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I'm going to have to give these people a closer look. I have a history of being very, at least by my standards, not careful enough with how I judge people, and so historically I've criticized people strongly and then I've come to like them afterwards. Almost to a man. It's been very strange. Vosh is bad because he doesn't fucking know what the fuck he's doing. Yeah, but neither do I. I remember the first time coming across your videos and not being sure what politics you were explicitly and implicitly supporting, which also isn't necessarily a bad thing, I guess. I don't know either. It's like I don't even know whether to call myself a political scientist or a political theorist, because I have issues with the framing of political science as a category. But I see my role, as if I have a role. I see my task, maybe is a better word, as being trying to figure this stuff out at a more clear level. I don't really have, I'm in a general sense left-wing. I don't really have a stake in any particular platform or movement succeeding at the moment. So, dude, how do you not have more subs? Your videos are based as fuck. I don't know. I think it's because I haven't really played, I haven't played much of a game of getting attention from these larger channels. I've more just done. I think most of my subscribers have come from critiques of some major right-wing channels, and then people have had like common issues with them, and so they've sort of latched on. But they've been very clever and smart about that. They have not been responding to my material at all. So I have extensive material criticizing the academic agent, for instance. And he was very clever about this. He's a stupid man, but he was very clever. He didn't respond after a single initial response, which got me a lot of people, by the way. But he ignored me after that point. Same with the distributists. Like they're not stupid in that sort of bare bones, obvious tactical way. And because they were my principal targets of critique, I guess just people didn't pick it up. But it's amazing what Vosh mentioning you for 5 seconds does. Acquiring 500 subs took about 6 months in my first year. It took about 4 months in my second, if memory serves. And then I almost feel insulted. Like he mentions my channel, I think 3 times in one stream, and all of a sudden half a year's work is done for, frankly, some of the easier videos I've had to do, because it didn't take a lot of research to do these. I'm actually, we're gonna get started soon, don't worry. I'm just chatting with some new people first, and then we'll get going. I'm actually a new sub. I was listening to you on Vosh's stream, and he really seemed to think you were doing good work. I came over here, checked some stuff out. You just kill it. Thank you. I mean, I expect he thinks I'm doing good work. I'm defending him in this context, but yeah. Alright, anyways. This is 3 hours long, so I'm not going to dilly-dally anymore. We're looking at Professor Flowers. The name immediately makes me want to side with her just because it sounds adorable. Arguing with Vosh about black nationalism, and apparently she has a video criticizing him at some point in the past. I've been completely, again, in the dark about this because I've been focusing on the other thing. So, if you're new to the channel, then this is a good opportunity to see how I operate. Granted, under conditions of having almost no sleep for the last 2 days, so I might be a little bit dim. And if you don't like it, now you know to leave. I'm terrible at marketing. That's why my subs aren't going up. What's the next move after this series? You will see. I do have some Patron videos I need to do. But you will see. There are immediate plans that are going to use this momentum. But anyways, without further ado, we are looking at Vosh talking with Professor Flowers about black nationalism. Let me know if the audio works.
Not all white people are colonizers. You yourself acknowledged it's possible for a white person to live ethically in South Africa. So maybe we go below the surface level and we talk about the underlying issue, like colonization and the systemic problems that lead to that.
Okay, so that framing right away is a little bit interesting. It's definitely framing her as unreasonable right out the gate, so I can see why people are upset about this.
Hey, howdy.
Hi.
How are we doing today?
Doing all right. I wasn't planning on spending my day off talking with you, but glad it's happening. My friend BP, who I mentioned in my last video, had this great idea for me to make brownies, and I cut them up into little pieces. And the idea is that if there's anything that you want brownie points for, I can just take this and put this in the jar. And I figured that maybe at the end we could count all the brownie points together.
Nice. No, I like that.
I remember you saying that.
I'm on a diet though, so I can't.
You saying on the last.
I can't eat them.
No, that's a shame. They're the Ghirardelli kind. So I just remember like the last video that you said that you're helping me out by platforming a content creator a 30th year size. So maybe we could start off with that for a brownie point if you wanted.
Oh well, yeah. I want as many brownie points as I can get. And yeah, isn't that how it always works, right? It's actually something that I've been struggling with a lot recently with my channel, you know, because people will, I don't mean you with this, I legitimately don't mean you, but like usually like far-right types, they antagonize me because they want the attention.
Honestly, I agree that her opening is cringe, but I kind of like that. I like it when people do, you know, dumb kind of off-the-cuff stuff like that, where it's not like heavily scripted and made to look neat and professional, because that tells me they're sincere.
And the attention they get at whether or not they come off looking good in interactions with me. So it's you know, you got to be careful with the clout game. It's rough out here. It's like Game of Thrones.
Is Professor Flowers actually a professor? Because that might tell me a little bit. Video is very loud in comparison to my voice. If I turn it down, is that better? Okay.
Yeah. So,
hey, I want to talk politics.
what did you ask me
talk
on?
Shop?
Yeah. Want to talk? Sure. Let's get to down why you asked me on here.
Yeah. Well, I guess I took issue with your video, the first one, and I guess the second one was just sort of a follow-through on the issues that I had with the first one. There is a mistake that I made, which I'd like to address up front, which is at a couple of times when I responded to your first video, I stated outright that if you would watch the entirety of the debate that I had with, yeah, Angel, I think that was their name.
Okay, so that's interesting. So there's a history here. You said the first video criticizing Vosh, so she has two, at least. She doesn't talk like other academics I know, but that could be the culture of the field. Maybe. Like, I don't talk like a lot of academics I know, and a lot of academics I know don't talk like me. Largely because the way I talk comes from a lot of what I read, and a lot of what I read growing up was stuff like Chesterton and like Terry Pratchett and whatnot. So It's just a YouTube name? Okay. So she might not be an actual professor, which is fine. I'm not an actual president.
Then you would find that
DIA Angel.
DIA Angel. That I would have changed my mind on the black separatism, black nationalism semantic distinction there. And that's actually not true. I changed my mind. I must have changed it in the following days afterwards. But I was wrong in the context of that specific debate. My position hadn't changed from beginning to end. Of course, since then, I think that I've been pretty responsible with my rhetoric, which is why I took issue with your assertion that I spread misinformation on this, you know?
Yeah, I understand you saying that. And I'm a little bit confused because my video actually talks about that. My video talks about how in the original debate, you talk about how you're against black nationalism. Eventually you realize like, oh, I'm talking about black separatism. Correct that. And then in my original video, actually, I talk about how your definition of black separatism and comparing it to white nationalism is still an issue because the context of what those things are very different. White nationalists who are separatists want to live in a different state because they think that black people are inferior. And people who are black separatists, there's obviously people who are very problematic in that group that I'm not going to sit here and defend. But there are people who are separatists because they just want to be away from their oppressors. And so painting them in a bad light is also an issue. Painting them as just white nationalists, basically, like making that false equivalency is an issue because when people talk about that, when people talk about how they need to get away from their oppressors, when people talk about how they have to have their own spaces, they're just painted as basically white nationalists and how that's a problem. It's making that space more hostile for people with those views.
Okay, so here's a question for you, and maybe people in the chat who know more about the context of this can help out. When I hear that, I don't immediately think that she is espousing a positive argument for, or rather, I should say, I don't think her stance is that she's positively for black separatism. I think it's sort of like when I was talking to Vosh briefly, and I said that he should probably be a little bit more charitable towards people he would refer to as tankies. I'm not one myself, but I recognize that a lot of them have legitimate reasons, even if I don't find them sufficient for myself to have some of the positions that they do. At the very least, they should be taken seriously, or at the very least, spoken to with respect. Is she talking about black separatists as a separate entity from herself, or is she also a part of that sphere? Put it on 125 times? I might. It's a little bit choppy right now, so I want it to be clear. We'll get to it? Okay, we'll just keep going then.
Yeah, well, I guess I just really do think they're pretty similar, you know? When you take a look at a lot of black separatist communities, there are a lot of underlying reactionary tendencies like homophobia, anti-Semitism. A lot of them do seem to believe in the same Jewish question, just from the opposite perspective. You know, Nazis think that Jewish people want to destroy white people by bringing in, black and brown people. And black separatists often think that Jewish people want to destroy black people by promoting white industry at the expense of black culture.
That's true, but it doesn't actually bear on what she was saying. At least from my experience, that's true. But granted, my experience is largely to do with things like the Nation of Islam. But
and it seems like the fundamental bones are pretty similar. And then when you get into the logistics of creating an ethno-state, there's not really any way to do that without genocide, Like, take South Africa, right? I mean, it's all well and good to talk about living free of your oppressors, but when you break apartheid in South Africa, there are millions of white people living in that country. Like, what do? Do you just, ship them all out? Do you build camps? I mean, it seems like this logic always leads down a really bad road.
There's also another factor that's not being touched on here, in that, when we talk about genocide, we're not always talking about, Holocaust-style physically exterminate the people themselves. Sometimes we're talking about, in the Uyghur case, that's characterized as a genocide when the Chinese state is not, depending on who you're talking to, the Chinese state is not systematically killing the Uyghur Muslims. They are effectively re-educating them out of their culture by force. So I think similarly too, when you're talking about removing people from a place, I think the geography in which they stand, that's also a part of their culture. It's highly significant. If you removed all of the Japanese from Japan, that's a massive cultural blow. I think Flowers does sympathize with black separatism or understand the feeling. I think she openly says so, but I don't know if she believes herself to be one. Okay. There's
a few things in there. So one of them is that the black separatists they're talking about who are homophobic, anti-Semitic, I agree. Fuck that. I'm not gonna like sit here and be like, that's a good thing. We need to like give that space to talk. I'm not talking about those kinds of people. I'm talking about the people who just want to be away from their oppressors. And then in the issue of South Africa, for example, or I guess any colonized country in Africa, like the way that people take power from their oppressors, even if it's not full on separatism, is they take the power back that's taken away from them. And then that's how they kick out the people who colonize them. There's a number of ways that could look like without actually committing genocide.
Doesn't that, I mean, how do you kick out millions of people because of their race without it being a genocide?
You take out, so like when colonization happens, the people who colonize those places take over industries, making it so that way the people who have the most power are running those countries. So what you do to take away their power is you take the power back. You make those industries not run by the people who are colonize them. And then because they have a lack of power, those people tend to leave. That's just like one example off the top of my head.
So my immediate question here is, like, I get what she's saying, but let's say, for example, like after a few generations, a lot of those people who you could characterize fairly easily by sight as being sort of the colonizing population or whatever, they may be themselves mixed with, native peoples as well. So I guess the question then is, how do you determine who is an oppressor and should be, whose stuff should be reappropriated? She means kick them out of power, not kick them out of the country. Yeah. I mean, the catch is, though, is that if you kick them out of power, now you have a large population that is deprived and resentful in your country, right? You can't. It's not a thing you can just keep around easily. Anyways.
Oh, sure. If you mean like reappropriating businesses and fairly distributing them, and then people of their own volition leave, that's fine. But that's not what I tend to see from like black separatists, right? They aren't like, we should have a proportional amount of industry controlled by black people in X country and then let the cards fall where they may. There's usually an explicit intent to not live with the racial groups that are associated with their oppression, which is kind of what you use in your video too, right? Like, you don't say people in colonized countries should have the right to reappropriate industry and make it democratic. You say they should have a right to determine whether they want to live with their oppressor. You're giving the state the power to deport people or kill them, when that's the language you use.
My point is that the people who colonize those people, if the people who are there and they live in their own country don't want to live with people who are colonized, they should have the right to determine if they want to live with those people or not. I think that could look.
I'm going to put this onto regular speed because I don't want to miss this, and it's going a bit fast.
Like a number of things. And my point is that it doesn't actually have to always look like genocide. And the way that you're painting it is just comparing it to white nationalism. And so my point is that you can critique these things. You don't have to agree with these things, but you can talk about that sentiment without calling it the same thing as white nationalism. That's my point.
There is a danger here, and I go over this actually in my history of the race concept and of the nation state, which I put a lot of work into and almost nobody saw. In that the categories that by which we distinguish one racial group from another, by which we would distinguish an oppressor group from the colonized group, those are themselves byproducts of colonization, and indeed of racism. And so there's a risk here of reifying that by using that rubric to determine who is an oppressor and who is not. So that's sort of immediately what leads you into a frame where modern style genocide is possible, if that makes sense. Once the colonizers no longer have mines, etc., to run, they tend to leave. The catch is they're not going to agree to be expropriated, right? So how do you take them if they refuse? Abolishing the means that foster that inequality of power would better solve the problem from one shot as opposed to targeting individuals with almost impossible methods. None of this is impossible.
The two videos.
But I've talked to white nationalists, and they kind of talk exactly like how you talk. Most of them aren't bold enough to say, yeah, I want to genocide or deport all the non-white people. Usually it's like, yeah, we want to restrict immigration from X countries, and we want to pay people to leave, and we want to incentivize white power in our country. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it seems like the underlying logic here is the same, right? Whether the grievances are legitimate or not, and I want to make a clear distinction here. Black people in South Africa have been oppressed by white people. White people in America are not oppressed by Jews or whatever. So obviously, in terms of correctly identifying past modes of oppression. There's a huge difference. But the feelings of persecution are the same. Nazis do feel persecuted, and as a product of that, the language they use comes out really similar to this. We should have the right to determine a space for our people, a right to choose our homeland. So the language to me comes off really, really similar to white nationalist stuff.
You take with violence. So one thing people tend to be really confused about is when certain like thinkers will characterize politics as always being inherently violent. That isn't by itself a justification for just any sort of, massacring activity or what have you, or even just like interpersonal violence in the street. The point is that all politics involves, I mean, essentially spatial relations. You're trying to determine what occupies what space where when you get right to the bottom of it. And any movement along those lines is going to result in a violation of whatever was there before. And that can be on the plane of rights, it can be on the plane of property, it can be on the plane of the borders of a territory, what have you. Impossible a sense of seeing who is the oppressor. Yeah, I'm almost... Is this like the correct place to start from for this analysis? Because Flowers seems very nervous. They're referring to another video whose argumentation I can't see. I wonder if it would make sense to actually go back and look at that video first.
Especially when we're dealing in like really ambiguous terms like they should have a right to live free of the oppressors. I mean, how can a person be an oppressor because of their race? Did all the millions of white people in South Africa like individually oppress all the black people there? It just seems weird to be retaliatory in that way.
So it's not that every single person is necessarily an oppressor. The thing that people are talking about with racism comes down to the system that people are part of. For example, I'm adopted and my dad is white and he's a European immigrant, actually. And he might not have been a part of the people who have enslaved Black people or descendants of those people, but he's still profiting off of a racist system. And there needs to be some sort of disempowerment of those people as far as power and racist structures in order for there to be equality.
Okay, so effectively what she's talking about is dismantling systemic racism, right? So she's not actually talking about disempowering the individual, she's talking about restructuring society, and like there may be problems with how she conceives of doing that. But she's talking about restructuring society so there isn't that active slant in favor of people of a certain description. So that by itself is fine.
So that's the point that I'm getting at. The reason why I'm being vague is because if you look at different countries who have decolonized themselves, you have like all these different ways that those countries have gone about it. You have
exercise some rigor and open up the referent video to refer to concurrently. That would be a smart thing to do. Let me actually do that. Let's have them both up because then we can just refer to them. Good suggestion, thank you. I guess we're going to Professor Flowers' channel.
Add it on demand.
Not yet. Okay. Let's see. Responding to Vosh's accusations of me. Why I keep kids out of pride. Did she remove it? Oh, I see. The master debater Vosh on black nationalism. That must be it. Okay, because this one's from a few days ago. Yeah, so that's got to be it. So we'll have this up. That's 25 minutes long. Do we want to look at that first? Oh, I've been invisible. I dissolved the wrong thing. Do we want to look at this one first? Hold up, press wait for it. Okay, we'll keep going with the debate.
People who have been very violent, and you have people who...
Sorry if this is frustrating. I honestly have never seen any of this before, so it's like... I don't want to be unfair to Flowers, and I don't want to be unfair to Vosh. Well, let's carry on with the debate until it gets heated, and then we'll go back to the previous video and see if that mitigates anything. Does that seem fair? No, we want to look at the other video first. Let's do a vote. Press 1 if you want to, or chat 1 if you want me to look at the Master Debater Vosh video that this is responding to first, and press 2 if we continue with the debate. Oh, hi, Zan. Be equally unfair to everyone. That's the goal. Okay, it looks like people are saying debate. Okay, we're going to continue with the debate, and then we'll move on to the other video if it seems like we need more context. I think that's fair. There's so much context, and the stream was so long it's kind of heavy, yeah. We'll go on with this a little bit. If it starts to look like they're talking past each other, I'm going to call it, because again, Flowers looks nervous. So I don't want to judge her too harshly for her performance here. Again, it's sort of like early Vosh even, when he would perform fairly badly and seem in bad faith in a lot of ways. And like, for example, in the Sargon debate, looking back on that, I kind of wonder if he wasn't like terrified. 111, oh good God. Oh, these are doubles. You can't vote twice. No, we're going with the debate first for a bit.
Who have somehow done it peacefully. We're reading a book called Ujamaa or it's called Ujamaa, but it's by Julius Nyerere, who was one of the leaders of getting rid of colonialism in Tanzania. Unfortunately, after he died, a lot of things were put in place, but he did it completely through voting, which is amazing. And we're also reading like Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. Frantz Fanon did a lot of work in Algeria, which and there was like a lot of violence that happened there. I think like dealing with colonialism is going to be messy, and there needs to be room to have nuance in these conversations. And I think just kind of reducing it to like, oh, this is white nationalism is very reductive, and it doesn't really give space for those people to talk about what to do.
Fanon is very interesting, by the way. If you want like a very, 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 shall we say, simplistic, I don't mean this in an insulting way. This is actually one of his merits. If you want a very simplistic introduction to sort of his concept of his approach to human psychology, or like the human, or what have you, or like what a conscious being is, his Black Skin White Masks is extremely good. It has some very illustrative lines in there. That being said, it's been a little while since I read The Wretched of the Earth, and I remember not liking it. Granted, this was like way back in the day, and I remember not liking it because it has a lot of language that sort of extols violence in a certain sense, not like in like a celebratory sense, but like a tendency when you're a little bit naive like that is to treat all expressions of violence in that way, regardless of the context or what it's responding to, as being inherently negative. 11 ones, 9 twos, you're counting? Yeah, but there were double ones. 2, 2, 2, 2. No, we're gonna go with my plan. We're gonna go with this for a little bit. We're not gonna go for 2. Oh, I see. Okay, so this section's actually short, where they're talking about how can you remove millions of people from a country. So I think we'll... Flower's accusation that Vosh is making the space something with an H. I'll tell you what, we're going to see to the end of this section here, how can you remove millions of people from a country, and then we'll move back to the original video. I think that's fair. Oh, this isn't a democracy. I am simply allowing you, my loyal subjects, the opportunity to vote now and then, and I can revoke that offer at any time. So you have no decision. I am simply allowing you to express yourselves briefly.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group colonized a group of people.
Oh, Sure.
Okay, so that's that's slippery. So the ethnic group didn't colonize a group of people. In fact, the ethnic group was constituted as a byproduct of that colonization. What colonized a group of people was a state, specifically an empire state. So I don't. This is one way in which this could start to reflect a little bit badly on Professor Flowers, and I still want to look at the original video before I start making judgments here. But conflating the political entity with an ethnicity, because you're belonging to a political entity has to do with things, especially in like the context of the liberal empire state that actually, presided over colonization. It's based on tacit assent to that and involvement in that state's activities and its benefits, right? So whereas you don't have a choice as to what you're born as. So I can see that being, she does it explicitly soon, yeah, and I can kind of see how she's leading herself to have to do that. I think that was a foolish thing to say. Whether or not she actually believes that, but I would not ethnicities don't colonize. Ethnicities are descriptions of, they aren't agents, right? Ethnicities don't do things. Ethnicities are part of a description of the group to which a person belongs, but it's not like a state where it's a group that is based around like some kind of will. Like like you can describe the emergence of a state by reference to like a social contract or something like that. Whether or not one took place, that's a thing you can do, but you can't do that with an ethnicity. Do you know settler colonialism and its superstructural effect on people? It isn't merely a hierarchical issue. I don't know if that's responding to me or not. But yeah, we'll keep going.
Sure, but
That's how.
I don't.
That's and if we disagree.
By the way, she's getting really nervous, and I'm sympathetic, being dead tired and having never had an audience this large for just myself. Hence my medication. So we shouldn't be too harsh on her in this context. I do want to see the actual video after the fact, because I've nervously committed myself to arguments that in retrospect I didn't actually want to commit myself to in the moment, because again, just a lot of pressure, and you're like, oh, which do I choose? Do I look like a stammering fool and freeze up, or do I try to salvage this as best I can? So
on that line, that's fine. But I think colonized people have to have the right to self-determination, what to do about the people who colonize them.
I agree that the ethnic group did indeed participate in the colonization, but I don't believe in taking blanket retribution against people for their bloodline because they're associated with the bloodline. It's not
about...
Well, it is.
You should. It's about being away from the people who oppressed you. It's about taking your power back from the people who oppressed you.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm
you
saying.
Can do that without deportation.
Okay, so the catch here is that, again, she's characterizing people who oppressed us in ethnic terms rather than in state terms, or in terms even of like specific, that's not a word, specific inheritances. So like this person is the, this person inherited their property or what have you from at some point family or contract relations that initially gained that property by means of expropriating the native population. And I mean, maybe that's the case for all of them, but again, the trick here is some people will come into that. No, I'm not actually sure I want to commit myself to that. It's tricky. Again, like, I think that the primary issue here is that we're talking about okay, well here's a question. Who is doing the expropriating or the reappropriation? Because if it's the state, that is itself going to be a European inheritance, right? Not necessarily in a dishonorable sense, like in the sense that the state itself, and I don't actually know the specific history here, but in the sense the state itself is like a European puppet or something. But that structure is not actually going to reflect traditional relations of people or of territories. So when she says take back from the oppressor, does she mean take back from people who inherited property dishonorably and let's say at some point before the establishment of the state of which they are now a part? Because presumably these people who have control of these means of production and this all this arable land, or the important stuff, the resources, the people who control the resources, presumably they are also citizens of the state. So are we talking about the state expropriating arbitrarily specific members of its citizenry and violating their rights as members of the state that way? Or are we talking about a revolution in which a new state is established that then does an initial redistribution of resources? Because perversely, that one's actually a bit more just. Because again, like, you've removed the context of justice already. So when you establish a new state, that is what you are effectively doing. You are setting out what are the parts of the state, where do they belong, who belongs where, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? I feel like she gets caught up using a line that she's heard used versus an organic argument for her beliefs. I can't read that. But again, like, what makes this really suspect is she is conflating ethnicity with oppressor. And that's not good. Like, for example, members of an ethnicity will include children, right? We're talking about people who haven't even reached a point where they can give tacit assent to, or tacit consent, that's the word, to take part in the benefits of the state.
That context through the lens where you analyze that. I'm sure some people think so, and I'm sure some people have found that they can't. You know what I'm saying? It's very different for each country and each context.
You can do that without deportation or creating an ethno-state. In fact, I can't really think of a single time in history that ethnic disempowerment was improved through the initiation of genocide, or like mass deportation. It doesn't seem to be a very effective way of changing the socioeconomic reality of the people who were previously colonized or previously oppressed. It seems like, if anything, it's an act of retribution, that people would go, oh, well, since we were the oppressed for centuries, now we have the right to enact moral vengeance against you and remove millions of you from the country or something. And that just seems to me, I mean, not only are you basically being the villain there, it just seems to me like this is a really impractical way of fixing any of these issues, you know? Like, I mean,
I think that's fair to say, like, that you could say, like, wow, like, mass deporting millions of people is, like, not really useful or helpful. But I also think, like, when you look at people who are working on decolonizing, like, that's not necessarily what's happening. People are just trying to, like, get the people who have power over them to leave. And I think in that context, that makes sense insofar as you're trying to break down a power structure.
Okay, so this is underdetermined because she's just disavowed deporting people, right? She said that that's not helpful. So so now she pivots to talk, not pivots in like a sinister sense per se, but now she moves to talking about anti-colonial thinkers and them talking about getting people to leave. She needs to be more clear about what that means. I don't know what she's talking about.
That's where I stand on it personally.
If they want to leave, that's fine, but I don't think any ethnic group has any more of a right to a country than any other ethnic group. I don't think any racial group here in America has the right to decide whether they want to live with any other racial group.
So, like, just to, like, be clear, because I actually don't know your views on this, like, you don't think that we should give the land back to indigenous people?
If that involved deporting the people who live here who aren't indigenous, then God, no, absolutely not. I don't think we could fix one genocide with another one. I think there are ways to address the problems with, like, Native American people here today involving, like, land redistribution or, like, forms of reparation and stuff. But if it involves, like, displacing, like, millions of Americans, that seems, I don't know, that seems pretty bad.
I think another principal issue, too, is that you wouldn't be giving the land back to the indigenous populations. First of all, you wouldn't be giving it back to the indigenous populations as they existed pre-contact. And secondly, you wouldn't be giving the land back to them as it existed pre-contact. You would be giving them whatever this means, giving them. Like, this is also underdetermined. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean sort of arbitrarily deciding to put indigenous band leaders, say, who have like themselves deep ties with the state, in charge of the state? Does it mean simply redistributing property to privilege indigenous families? Like, I don't know. It's so complicated because the thing that has been appropriated has itself changed over time. She doesn't believe deportation or genocide is good, but would ask, why can we tell these people how to behave? Why do we have that right? That argument is just, yeah. Anyways.
I mean, I think it sounds pretty bad. I don't think indigenous people are trying to do that. And at the same time,
I agree.
like,
yeah.
These are the people who are colonized, and they have to have their own autonomy to decide what happens after being colonized by people.
Well,
And again, I don't
limits,
think that's
right?
the solution for them.
Well, within limits.
I think
they couldn't
should
go
get
like
to decide
we get
those
to kill them all.
limits.
Okay, so I think this is the line. Is this the line? This sounds familiar. I read some people talking about how she was saying that the colonized should get to decide what they do. This is tricky. So within limits, what sets the limits? Right? Like, that's a question now of sovereignty. Who sets the limits is the sovereign. Right? That's the Schmittian characterization. Sovereign is he who decides on the exception. What are the limits? I don't think she actually positively argued for genocide here. Not in this context. I think she's being purposely vague. That makes me think her real position is a hardline one. I don't know that that's true. Again, like, this is a super complicated topic. And I think, with respect to Vosh, he's taking a sort of internalistic view on this. When he talks about, like, limits and things like that. Like, I am adamantly anti-genocide, and I'm adamantly anti-deportation of people based upon their race. But, at the same time, it doesn't seem like that's the appropriate way to respond to that argument that the colonized people should get to decide. Because the question of who gets to decide isn't a question of morality, it's a question of power. Morality puts duties upon you. It's downstream from the ethical sphere in which you're operating, and the ethical sphere is established by power. But she won't condemn genocide, which is stupid. That may be stupid. Like, she may be making the same observation that I am mentally, and therefore going, well, then therefore it doesn't actually make sense practically to sort of ban genocide from the list of things we can do, because we actually can't do that. That is a thing that is done by a body that has no higher power over it to actually, like, hold it to, like, standards that we would like it to be held to. Now, where that would get really irresponsible, however, is in characterizing that as a thing that should be on the table in a normative sense. That predisposes people to think of that as a thing that that predisposes people to carry that with them as a thing that can be done positively. Does that make sense? She should just condemn genocide personally, but say we can't deny it from others. I don't know. Again, like, when you're dealing in this space, it's tricky because you may have, like, moral convictions, but morality objectively doesn't apply. Because, again, morality has to do with duties, and we're talking about a situation in which all duty-conferring entities are being swept off the map. Because you have a duty to a thing, right? It's going to be to a community, or to a state, or to a creed, or to yada, 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 yada. If we're talking about a revolutionary context, that's a context in which all of these institutions to which that like particularize your duties are gone. They're being dismantled. I've heard some lefty streamers describe ethics as applied morality. Is that true or not at all, or so? So I adamantly disagree with that. So, morality as a concept is more recent than ethics, but basically this is how it breaks down. Ethics comes from ethos. It's a Greek term. I'm self-taught on this, so like take it with a grain of salt. Ethics comes from ethos, which refers to character. It refers to both the character of a state, or a polis to be more accurate, and the kinds of citizens it produces, or the kinds of people it produces. So, for example, Aristotle's Ethics, he starts it off saying, this is a work of political science. This is the science of the human good. And what does he do? He doesn't give you a list of things that people ought to do. He doesn't argue for things that we ought to do. He argues for things that we ought to be. A city should be so arranged, and its laws so arranged, that people are educated in it to be brave and generous, and to put the well-being of the community above themselves, and to be, musical in Plato's language, things like that, to have like good taste and whatnot. Morality, by contrast, Kant characterizes the distinction fairly effectively. So, ethics refers to, again, the character of the community that makes you what you are. Morality has to do with the duties that are incumbent on a subject. So, a moral question is it permissible in context for me to rob from this thing? And the answer will be determined again by the ethics of the society in which one lives. So morality is downstream from ethics. It concerns the subject. Ethics concerns sort of the spirit, not in the Hegelian sense necessarily, although there's some loose connection there. The spirit of the place that gives rise to your moral duties. The language it's confusing because people use ethics and morality interchangeably a lot today, and that's incorrect. Or at least it should be incorrect. Language is use, of course. Although, I would argue that if you use terms in a way where there are contradictions and the use of one term should imply a different use of another term, you can say that usage is incorrect. I don't think there's a contradiction there. But the short version of it is, the trick about applying moral standards to cases of revolution is that we're talking about a situation in which the ethical sphere is being wiped clean and something new is being built. So at that point, like at the end of the day, and I don't like moralists for this reason, because I think morality is actually fairly weak once you're thinking about this philosophically. At the end of the day, I think what actually matters is what you care about. Because, again, like the establishment of an ethical sphere is going to be an act of choice and will and all of these other things. It is not going to be established by moral duties. I think at the end of the day, your own character is going to dictate what you... what people love and hate, basically, is going to determine what, in the case of a revolution, establishing a new state, of what morality will be. Again, go easy on me. I am ridiculously tired right now, and I'm not a philosophy major. I'm in political science, so. However, I have read a ton of Aristotle, as Professor Clifford Bates can affirm. What do I think of the notion of moral or just genocide? My mental association with genocide is evil. If I'm being technical about it, there isn't really such a thing as justice or morality in the context of dealing with a situation involving sovereign power. That's why sovereign power is so terrifying. It's something akin to an act of God. Again, at the end of the day, like, morality is not a moral conception is not going to protect you from choosing something bad. Sorry about that. I'm not the only drunk person in the room. What was I saying? That completely threw me off. Right, okay, morality. So no, I don't think there is such thing as a moral genocide. definitionally, because I think we're talking about a situation that is beyond morality. I think at that point, when you're dealing with genocide and opposing it on those grounds, that is something that you hate. You oppose genocide because you hate it. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. We'll keep going.
Well, wait. If Native Americans wanted to start, like, taking out a blood debt on white people, I don't think they should be allowed to just start killing us, right?
I mean, I don't think they should be allowed to start killing people. What I'm saying is, like, they should have the right to decide if the colonization should continue, if the people who should stay here or not.
What do you mean? But where's here? The whole of America? Do we deport 1/3 billion people back to Europe or something? I mean, we'd cause like a worldwide catastrophe so that what? A few million people can re-inherit the land. I like the logistics of this seem really odd to me. Shouldn't we talk about ways that you can pragmatically address these issues and not like just give massive moral leeway to people just because they're oppressed? I don't think being oppressed means that you have any more of a right to be like a moral judge, jury, and executioner than any other member of any other group.
Again, this is the mistake. Who has the right to be the judge, jury, and executioner? That's the question. That's what politics is concerned with. Who has the right to be... And the answer, of course, is who can be that? Who can actually enact that decision? Because we're not talking about right anymore. Right is an internalistic thing. It's established by an ambience in which you're operating. When we're talking about, like when we're talking about establishing a new state, it's as if we're talking about, like, it's kids playing in a sandbox, effectively. Nah, fuck that. You can't kick someone out because of the wrong race. I mean, I'd hate it. I would think it's bad, but you objectively can. It's been done. And there are arguments for why that's extremely wicked and base thing to do. But as stated, yeah, that is a practical thing that people can do. That's why this is being debated, of course. So it's tricky. 1.25 times speed. The problem with going at 1 times and a quarter speed is that I can't catch everything they're saying, and Professor Flower's audio is choppy.
I think the point is that it's not actually like the US's land. We're on indigenous land and they need to have their own autonomy. I highly doubt that if we gave the land back to indigenous people, that they would do the same thing that white people did to them. And I think that's also like a mistake around Black people. Like, Black people having power doesn't mean that they're going to just like start murdering white people.
Yeah,
white people just like want equality, or Black people just want equality.
Wait, but I don't have a
like,
problem.
I think people should have
with land back. I don't have a problem with Black people having power. I'm specifically saying I take issue with your claim that oppressed people have the right to determine whether or not they want to live with their oppressor. I don't think the land back movement
like,
is about kicking Europeans out.
Like, there's so many ways that could look like besides committing mass genocide. You know, like, you keep on talking about like, oh, that means that we're just going to kill people or deport people. There's just so many ways that could look like in the US, that could look like in different African countries. And I think people should have the right to determine that, to be able to talk about what to do.
But I'm in favor of those things. I'm explicitly against the claim you made.
Like, if you're in favor of those things,
what are
it's
those?
Like,
what things?
What really bothers me is that when people talk about this, when people even start to talk about, like, just, you know, how LeftTube is divided by race, right? Like, I watched that you have with No Name and St. Andrew. This person's just saying like, hey, my tweets aren't for you. You're calling this person a segregationist. That's my point. My point is that people can't say their opinions without being called these extremes. People can't even talk about like, wow, what would it be like to live in a world where we're not around the people who are oppressing us that time?
I mean, she's talking about the most existentially extreme things possible, right? So I don't think that's particularly fair. Like, the trick with political debates is that it's not like philosophy. I mean, even philosophy is like this too. But the trick is that the upshot of losing is not that one idea was proved to be, you know, in context, more coherent than another. And then that can inform future judgments. The upshot is that decisions are now ratified by the outcome of the debate. excuse me, sorry, decisions with very serious and wide-reaching consequences. Oh, what happened? Why did we jump back? Oh my god.
Absolutely. I'm on board with that, and I spend time on my platform.
Opinions without being called these extremes. People can't even talk about like, wow, what would it be like to live in a world where we're not around the people who are oppressing us all the time? And then we talk about this, and then we start talking about separatism as this wild extreme. And it's like there are separatism that I think is this wild extreme, but there's also separatism.
You're doing it back and forth. Just to be told.
It is, and we don't have room for this conversation.
So just to be clear, I don't think you have a right to live in a world without white people or in a country without white people. You keep dancing back and forth between these 2 points. I don't think any ethnic or racial group has a right to exclude or expel other ethnic or racial groups for any reason, no matter who was the colonized or the colonizer. Now, if we're talking about other policy to redistribute power or address differences or stuff like that, then absolutely, I'm on board with that, and I spend time on my platform advocating for those things. But the problem that I had with those no-name tweets is that it was like, my cultural product isn't for white people. I think that's essentially segregationist gatekeeping. Obviously not like, one water fountain for the other type stuff. We're not talking about state power
But
here,
you can understand that there's black people who want to have black spaces. Like you understand that.
Yeah, as long as they're not like backed by the force of a state. Yeah.
Okay, well, No Name's just saying that this tweet is for white people, and you're calling that person a segregationist. That's like the kind of rhetoric I'm critiquing. Well, and again, I'm not saying that you can't critique separatism, that you can't like be on board with this stuff. What I'm saying is that your content that you're making is making such extremes where people talk about how they're frustrated with white people. People talk about how like, hey, we need spaces where it was with black people. This content isn't made for white people, so your opinion isn't as relevant here. When that's happening, you're calling these people segregationists. You're comparing everyone in this box to white nationalism. And what I'm saying is that's not a fair critique. I think it's okay if you're not okay with separatism. But what I'm saying is that these critiques and making these false equivalencies to white nationalism is unfair.
Well, I didn't.
Does that make sense? Does that clear things up?
Well, I didn't call No Name a white nationalist, I don't think. I don't remember the exact tweet thread.
You said that she was a segregationist.
Well, yeah, there were elements of that stuff that were pretty segregationist, I think. I don't have much respect for the tweet
that said this isn't for white people. That was it. That was the tweet.
Well, I think that was in response to some other stuff, right? Where people were criticizing something that she said, and she said that it's not for white people. I need to look at the thread again, but if I remember like the general gist of stuff, the thing that bothers me is that I think that the only real difference between doing that and somebody saying this content isn't for black people is really like broader societal power. I think it's really unproductive to suggest that racism can be fixed or addressed by reifying and reflecting a lot of the exclusionary tendencies that systemic racism brings about only through the lens of the oppressed, And No Name has done some stuff that I found pretty yikesy. I have to go back and look through the Twitter thread. When I was having the conversation with the person who was defending those tweets, it also feels to me sometimes like we're not really talking about justice. We're just talking about some black people don't really like being around white people, which I guess is you're right, but I don't think that's like a morally defensible political movement, But
you don't understand why there are black people who don't want to be around white people.
I understand why there are white people who don't want to be around black people, but I don't give them much moral credence either. I get why they want it. I just don't think that it's necessarily a good thing.
Like why people who have to deal with racist shit all the time are like, hey, I don't want to be around the people who keep on making racist shit.
Well,
do I understand that right? Or like, I don't understand.
Well, I think you can say,
what's the issue with that?
Well, I think you can say I want an anti-racist space, but what you've just done there is essentialize racism as something only white people can express and something black people don't express. And I can tell you from my experience.
I don't think she's done that, but I think Vosh sort of put his finger on something earlier when he was talking about reifying, I forget the exact language, but like the oppressive structure only from the vantage of the oppressed. The issue here is that, again, like if you have like this, if you were entrenching a colonialism-derived concept of ethnicity in the constitution of a new state, you are making that a permanent part of like the skeleton of that state, so it never goes away. Leaving aside the fact again that the state itself is constituted historically through colonialism. But again, I think she's very nervous. She's under a lot of pressure. My inclination is to be generous to her, but at the same time, like, you know, it is yikesy. Like, but I mean, politics is yikesy. There's no way around it. Like, there's actually no such thing as moderation in politics. There is conservative. Well, I mean, I'm ad hocing this, but there is, you want things to stay the way they are, or you want things to be radically different, and that is uncharted waters. So, if generally being moderate means affirming in a radical way the status quo in some sense. She is nervous, but why is he so hostile? I mean, she made 2 videos directly criticizing Vosh, so he has justification to treat her as in an antagonistic fashion. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back and we'll continue with this. Okay, sorry about that. We'll keep going.
Online, there are a lot of black people who are pretty goddamn racist in all directions, and there are a lot of white people who aren't. If you want an anti-racist space, go for it. Godspeed. Make more of them. But when you essentialize it, it's like a white...
Actually, I think I'm going to characterize it this way. The issue with what Flowers is proposing, or what Flowers is defending, rather, would be more accurate, is that in a softer sense, like in a colloquially softer sense, she's proposing a racist state inherently. Not racist in the sense necessarily of hating people of certain racial descriptions, but a state structure that is inherently sensitive to race by identifying the oppressor, aka that which must be expropriated of their of any holdings in the territory of the state, let's say, along ethnic grounds, along racial grounds. So you never actually move out of those colonial racial conceptions or racial divisions. Does that make sense? Yeah. She seems nervous all the time. Give her other videos and conversations. I'm nervous all the time. I can't fault her for that. Like, look, for God's sake, there's like 70 people watching this and we're talking about genocide and I'm a little bit tipsy and underslept. There are so many ways you can slip up in this context, and Vosh is a very effective speaker, and she knows that she's taking an unpopular position, so she has reason to be nervous. Is this similar to Ghazi and the Black Hammer organization? No. I mean, there's probably going to be some overlap a little bit, but I wouldn't characterize her that way at all. That'd be very unfair. Ghazi is a nutball.
Black thing, I think that can lead to a lot of really bad roads, you know?
I don't understand like why it's wrong if a black person's like, I'm talking to black people right now.
Well,
and I think a lot of white people aren't going to get it.
Well, I mean,
I don't understand like how that leads to bad things when like that's just like a reality that black people.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So that's talking about in the context of like Twitter, like in terms of like who you interpersonally relate to. Like in a society with a history of racism that is itself in certain key respects systemically racist, you're going to have an experience based on your race that somebody who is not of your race. We're essentializing race, but the point is that the state essentializes race, or implicitly does, or at the very least behaves in such a way as if there are like firm racial distinctions, so we can talk in this literal way in this context. Somebody who is, shall we say, somebody who relates to the state as a member of X race is going to have a different experience than somebody who relates to their community as Y race. And so it makes sense that in certain contexts, when you want to talk to people who have a shared experience, that you can address people of X race over Y race. I don't like how this is bleeding over into the conversation about making a race-specific space in political terms, because right now we're talking about like who you associate with or communication or stuff like that, like stuff that takes place within an established stable social context, right? Towards the end, he really makes a covered effort, I don't know what that means, to understand where she's coming from, and they almost start to hear each other. Okay, well, it's a shame that toward the end is 3 freaking hours later. This kind of conversation should not be 3 hours long, or it should have a moderator. Or it should be a seminar, there should be other people. Another problem with this is that, like, Vosh is in the unenviable position in this case. I mean, maximally enviable position from my vantage, but in the unenviable position of being in a situation where if he allows somebody to come off as reasonable who is toxic, and I'm not saying that's the case with Professor Flowers, that has the side effect of validating that person's position. So let's take an extreme case. Like if somebody like Nick Fuentes manages to score a bunch of points, and Vosh just has to accept them without framing them in some way so that we are reminded again of what Nick Fuentes is for, that validates Nick Fuentes. That gives him credibility. And giving Nick Fuentes credibility is a bad thing from Vosh's standpoint, and I think from mine. I think from most of the people here. So, lol, he grills her for 3 hours, then says, "Let's talk." I mean, you know what though? Saying "let's talk" at the end. Saying "let's talk" at the end or at the beginning. Either of those are actually extremely generous. Doing that in the middle and then tearing her to shreds, that would be cruel. Drinking helps everything. That has not been my experience. But you know what? I'm due for a dental appointment. My jaw is killing me. I'm dead tired. I was practically fainting at work today. And I have never had an audience of 70 people staring at me talking about genocide of all things. So, you know what? I'm indulging. And by the way, for anybody who just dropped in, I know for a certainty that most of you have never been here before, so welcome. I feel like they apply a static reading of racism, fixing it in time as an unchanging concept, unable to dynamically change as the society's power dynamics change. That's a good point, Sansi, and actually I think that sort of resonates with what I was saying. Is the problem with constituting a state that reappropriates property and resources along racial lines that are themselves the product of a very specific political history. Again, I have a fairly detailed history of this, sort of condensed in 2 videos. The origins of the race concept and the con of the nation state. Give those a look. They took a lot of reading and work to get to. But yeah, if you establish who gets to be and own what and where, or where and what, if you do that along racial lines in the framing of a new constitution after a revolution, you have just set racism in stone. We're now talking about systemic racism that is actually codified explicitly. Oh god, this was such a mistake. Zanzi says, a key aspect of Lenin's state and revolution is that we're the product of our society, so our solutions are informed by our embedded hegemony. We need to produce a society that thinks different to us. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Marx and Marxists are generally so reticent to talk about what communism will look like. This is what Marx says in the Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. There's a nice quote where he says something to the effect of, the French revolutionists failed because they were repeating the poetry of the old regime. That's not his language, but that's roughly what he says. The point basically is that if we try to frame the future constitution in terms of the old constitution that we are trying to get away from, like if we're just reshuffling the categories so that this category that was a part of that old constitution gets all the good stuff and this one gets all the bad stuff, we're just reifying it. We're just making it again. So, I'm glad to see President Sunday's Sigma grind paying off. I'm just pissed off that it's just because Vosh recognized me finally. It's weird, too. I did not expect Sargon to be replying to my conversation with Doomer Politics in particular. That was interesting. In fact, at the back of my mind, I almost go, does he, like, secretly like me? Because why would he do that otherwise? That's only to my benefit. I'm not hurt by Sargon pointing me out. I'm not trying to appeal to a right-wing audience. This is brilliant. Like, me pissing off Sargon of Akkad? That's a gift. That's a gift. Again, like, getting responded to by Sargon of Akkad, and then, as a consequence of that, getting responded to by Vosh. I got more subs in the past 2 days than I did in the last 6 months. There is no justice in this world. Oh, God. I want to go to the other video before I'm too wasted to actually deal with it appropriately. And then afterwards, we can just chat a little bit. My general impression here is that I think Professor Flowers is largely a benign figure. I think she's in a sphere in which what is really stressed, again, is the point that, and this is true, that a lot of moral restrictions on political action are directly in the interest of an oppressor class. And so, like, even if you want to retain, like, a virtuous disposition in the course of, again, like, carrying out a revolution and reordering a society in a good way, or in the best way, or whatever, being, like, really, what's the word? Like, just, like, that can, like, neuter your revolutionary potential, entirely, and that in itself can conduce to an unjust outcome. Does that make sense? Like, I get it. But at the same time, when pressed, she goes right to removing people on ethnic grounds. So that's, as they say in the vernacular, yikesy. I don't think she's malicious. I think she hasn't thought through the ramifications of her rhetoric. I think she's probably in a, and I mean this in a very caring way, she's in a bit of an echo chamber, not in the sense that I think she's closed-minded to, like, other thoughts, but I think she's spent a lot of time in a space where sorry, she spent a lot of time in a space. I love that you're trying to be quiet and being as loud as possible in the process. That's fine. It's okay. Anyways, sorry, what was I saying? Right. I think she's been in a space where, hand-wringy. That's the word I'm looking for. Where people are, like, super hesitant to... Oh, God. Okay. I think she talks to a lot of people where saying violence and whatnot is off the table inherently, or, like, genocide and whatnot is off the table inherently, has implications of basically affirming a colonial morality and colonial limitations and all those other things, such that she doesn't know how to translate to an outside audience. And again, there's yikesy stuff about that. I'm on board with the people who are finding this, like, this makes me uneasy too. But I don't think she is malicious. I think she's, I don't think she's learned the art of compromising your rhetoric with a strange audience. Which, to be fair, I haven't either. Like, I don't talk in a way that's accessible to a mainstream audience. It's not because I'm smart, it's because I'm dumb. It's because I speak in the way... I speak consistently with the stuff that I read all the time. Like, translating that out to a lay audience, that's a skill. And it's a skill that requires, incidentally, like, a greater mastery of the material than I have. I don't think she's any more malicious than the Distributist or Keith Woods. I think she is substantially less malicious than the Distributist and Keith Woods. I'll say that for her right off, easily. Easily. I broke ties with the Distributist because he couldn't stand me criticizing, what's his name? American Renaissance guy. Jared Taylor. He couldn't stand me criticizing that guy. And he like devolved into screaming when I was what did I actually say? We were arguing about affirmative action, and he cited the bell curve explicitly. And I said that, look, like the studies they used were first of all, like it's impossible to actually make the kinds of determinations that they did because again, statistics don't actually reveal systemic processes. They reveal the results. They can indicate them, but only in a positive sense. You can't actually exclude them with, like, handing all the black kids in the school an IQ test and handing all the white kids in the school an IQ test. You can't determine from that who is naturally predisposed to be smarter, if anyone. And he was furious about that. Like, these people are actually hateful. I think in this context, it's substantially different. We are talking again about communities that have a legitimate claim to wanting to undo a systemic prejudice and systemic disadvantage. And I think, again, like when she's talking about, like, you can't leave stuff off the table, I don't like what she's insisting can't be left on the table. But at the same time, like, this isn't the same thing as a white nationalist. Now, she's acknowledged that there are a lot of black nationalists who have a lot of really toxic views with respect to, like gay people, trans people, yada yada yada. And I don't think she's hostile. I don't think she's, shall we say, I don't think she's pernicious in that way. But I don't think she's treating the genocide question with the due weight it deserves. I think she needs to be really adamant that, like, look, at the end of the day, like, I don't have the power to control how people will act once they have been given their power back, right? Or whatever power I think is theirs by right in a loose sense. But at the same time, like, I want to say, like, guys, this is not the world we want to make. Don't do stuff like this. And she doesn't do that. Again, she's nervous. I don't want to fault her too much for it. Talking to somebody with this kind of audience is terrifying. Even at the end of the day, if it's just a bloke with a microphone, it's a bloke with a microphone who has more followers than the King of Persia had soldiers. This is like, to put the scale into perspective, Vosh's following in historical terms is unprecedented. It's huge. Sargon's, by contrast, is like 3 times the size. It's ridiculous. You embarrass yourself on Vosh. You embarrass yourself in front of more people than the average person is exposed to in their lifetime, in a second, over gaffes. Which, by the way, is one thing that I criticized Vosh directly for, is that, like, when... did I actually? I'm going to walk that back a little bit. I indicated it, especially in his engagements with people he would characterize as tankies. I think in his position, he needs to be really, really careful to the extent that he can be. And I don't know what he can actually do in this context, because he is a human being. He has weaknesses. He gets nervous. There are stakes he has to balance. But making earnest and sincere people look bad for being nervous, I think he could err on the side of generosity and, like, look, just to be as fair as possible, let's walk this back a little bit. Can you characterize in as benign terms as you can? Like, try to translate this out to me so that I am not falsely... I don't receive a mischaracterization of you from you because of your inability to translate. Like, let's start from go. So you're not for genocide. You just recognize that that's a thing that may end up happening as a result of doing things that we need to do, right? Like, think of the Haitian Revolution. I mentioned this to Vosh on his stream last night, I believe. When the Haitian Revolution took place, a lot of frankly innocent family members of white slave and landowners were killed, murdered, in strong sense. And the people who murdered those children, etc., were incredibly debauched when they did so. However, giving those people the power to do that was an inevitable consequence of the revolution, and without the revolution, they would all still be slaves, including their children. And so what do? This is again why politics goes into the realm beyond good and evil, because good and evil is something that that's something that takes place in a normal state of affairs, where there actually is a structure whereby actions can be judged. When you're in the wilderness and it's chaos, and that's the situation you're in the context of a revolution, you're in there is no fixity. Anything can happen. Haitian Revolution was good. Haitian Revolution was good. It brought a lot of people out of slavery. But there were bad things that had to happen in the course of it. And not just bad things that had to happen in the course of it. There were bad things that didn't have to happen, but would be allowed to happen, and that allowance couldn't be revoked once the revolution took place. Does that make sense? The Haitians didn't deport white civilians. They targeted those in power and military combatants. Some of them did target civilians. Not like as the revolution didn't target civilians, but individuals did. There was a lot of revenge that took place. Again, like it's... But could you argue that those actions were harmful? All politics is violence. All politics is harmful. Look, like the word politics itself literally comes from the word for a castle wall, a piece of military technology. Politics is always violence. They also spared the Polish because those white people were not their enemies. I think that's something that Zizek brought up, and that was interesting. Again, though, like we're not talking specifically here about the revolution's targets, right? We're not talking about the movement's targets. What we're talking about is a situation in which all of a sudden all law and order is broken down, and so people who are of a disposition to enact revenge on individual strangers with like more or less discrimination, they're allowed to do so. Like this is again this is going to happen has happened in any revolution ever, because like again in the context of like let's say raiding the Tsar's palace or something like that, the people who go in are going to make decisions in the moment about what they are going to do with what they find in that building. So it's basically the same criticism of people who complain about the violence when it comes to BLM. Sort of. I mean, BLM is actually, relatively speaking, a super civil set of demonstrations. But yeah, basically, yeah. So, and I mean, like, especially with respect to Black Lives Matter, we're talking about, like, protests that involve riots sometimes. But protests and riots in response to unjust police killings. If the police are killing you, then the state loses even its reference to the social contract or to your tacit consent as the basis of its legitimacy. So again, like you can complain, like look, in the course of Black Lives Matter riots, some people are looting and some people are breaking windows and there's damages and innocent people get hurt. But I mean, who are you to say that? Like, the state can't condemn them for that. They hurt innocent people all the time. That was the impetus for the riots. Again, I don't like characterizing politics in moral terms, but that doesn't mean I don't characterize it in normative terms. What you love and what you hate or what you allow yourself to hate, that determines your action. Because the universe does not unfortunately have like these nice little rulers written in the clouds that says this is the thing you shall do and this is the thing you shall not do. We have to decide what the world is going to be, which is terrifying, because we are generally as loving or as hateful as we are by luck, by sheer luck. We were born in a certain place, we encountered certain people, we had certain goods, we weren't deprived of certain things, yada yada yada. This was understood, by the way, by ancient Greeks. who recognize that when you are unjust to someone, it isn't just the case that you heap on bad things for yourself. You make the person you're unjust to less just themselves. You condition them to hate. You condition them to expect deprivation, to be accustomed to deprivation, which is not good. There's a saying in is it ancient Greek? I read it somewhere. I can't remember where. I think it might have actually been in Machiavelli. But there's a saying that there's nothing worse than a slave in power, and in this context, by the way, we're not talking about slave in the modern context, which, by the way, would be a lot worse because we treated in the transatlantic slave trade, those slaves are treated nightmarishly, like en masse. Like, there were badly treated servants and slaves back in the day, but like, good God, not like they weren't transported like a resource. I mean, they were, but like not at that scale. And the reason why is because, let's say in the event of a slave revolt, like let's say the Helots take over Sparta and take control. These are people who have no reason at all. They're not conditioned to treating people with mercy because they've always been in a situation of being disempowered and oppressed. They have no reason, much less any proclivity to treating their Spartan overlords with generosity and kindness and forgiveness because they were not treated that way themselves. And they have every reason to expect that given the opportunity, they will revolt themselves and take back everything away from them. Politics is super violent. It's the most violent thing in the world. It is violence. For me, a key aspect is the process of decolonization. For white people, this means shedding their whiteness and stop legitimizing white supremacist social systems. If they do this, they can stay. Yeah, and I think the problem... That's a good point, Zenzi. And I think the problem with Professor Flower's characterization of whatever it is she is in favor of is that it actually entrenches whiteness in the constitution of whatever state comes afterwards. Because if you're saying that we are dividing people along these colonialism-derived categories of race, and we are expropriating some and giving those expropriations to other people, justly or not, you are basically making that an existential dimension of the political world. Does that make sense? Taiping Rebellion in China was a war of an oppressed ethnic minority revolting against a dominant Han ethnicity. 50 million people died. Oh yeah, that's a fascinating case. It's like a World War I scale conflict. Almost nobody talks about it, the Taiping Rebellion. It's really interesting. I can't remember his name, but the self asserted prophet who headed the Taiping Kingdom of Heavenly Peace, was it? He rewrote the Bible. It's really interesting. Anyways, I'm getting diverted. Let's stop with the debate. I think we've got the sense of how this is going to go. I don't think they're going to talk to each other in a positive way. I want to see what the original video was. And maybe I'm going to watch this over again later, and I'll probably address it in a future stream. But again, like, I'm not on my best at all. I literally fainted at work today. It was not fun. I just felt like, you know what? We've got a bunch of new people here. I should probably say hi. You know, over a nice, light conversation about genocide. I'm a genius. No, I'm going to shoot that right back at you, Imran Agassi. That's a great way to put it. It's the reification of the axioms of that which you wish to do away with. Well put. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Okay, let's look at this. So this is what this conversation is in response to. The master debate... Ooh, oh, that felt so good. I hope you couldn't hear that. That was gross, but that felt amazing. The master debater Vosh on black nationalism. All right, let's watch this. I can watch this one on speed, because she's not going to be nervous. This is going to be scripted out and planned, I hope. So let's set this to 125, and let's go.
So there was a lot of drama on Twitter the other day that disturbed me. And I feel like it would be better if I made a quick video on it, rather than keep on trying to tweet at the problem. Let me just say that there were some moments that were a disturbing wake-up call. Hey everyone, it's Professor Flowers. Please take a moment to subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. Now, to give it a little context, about a year ago, Vosh had a debate with DIA Angel on black nationalism. If you want to watch the full debate yourself, I'll link it in the description below. Long story short, Vosh argues...
Oh god, this is like a years-long thing, isn't it? to get the context for this, I need to watch like the Lord of the Rings trilogy and debates.
That black nationalism is the same as white nationalism. Here are some highlights.
Black nationalists are just white nationalists, except black. So yeah.
Have you spoken to a lot of black nationalists?
Not nearly as many as white nationalists. No, I've talked to maybe like 2. I've had serious convos with like 2 or 3. And you're telling me exactly what white nationalists have told me. The only difference is you guys just don't have the power to start fucking people over yet. But give it 100 years, you know, Africa's growing pretty fast. I guarantee you that give it a little bit of time, you motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous.
So when I watched this...
Okay, I don't like this because there's a normative element here that I don't think is appropriate. So again, like when we're talking about white nationalists, we're talking about people who are resentful of people who they basically victimize for the most part. So... so... It's you know, in a very serious way, an unprovoked reaction, whereas there is people who, again, take on those attitudes and whatnot in the context of black nationalism. They are doing so within an ambience of being directly wronged. So, President Snudge is buying the Blu-ray box set of Vosh debates. Oh, God. I actually haven't watched Vosh in forever. Like, by the time... Like, I even talked to Fellow Traveler a little while ago, and I was highly critical of Vosh. Largely because I just found, like, a lot of the recent stuff just not super interesting to me. So I'm in the dark about so much, because I just haven't been paying attention to this. What's been more interesting to me hasn't been Vosh's side of things. It's been actually the Destiny side of things, because, again... I think what's been really disturbing, if interesting to watch, has been sort of this attempt to court the audiences of major right-wing streamers as they've had a bit of a resurgence recently by signaling that, hey, you know, we're not going to repeat your talking points, but we're going to talk to you. We're going to talk to you. We're going to give you the engagement of our audiences. We're going to talk to you easily. Like Booksmart's had a really weird conversation with Lauren Southern in which he wasn't going to push back on anything himself. He was just going to talk rhetoric, which strikes me as like super weird, because this is an extremely dangerous person if she actually like gets like serious, more influence than she has. If her position starts to prevail, giving her rhetorical tips, that's like arming the Nazis with nukes. But you know what? Hey, he's going to field criticisms by the audience. Okay, sure. But the general strategy seems to be to court the audience of right-wing figures by identifying those characters that they are most hostile towards and demonstrating common cause by similarly being hostile to them. So, like, Destiny is not a stupid man. I don't think for a second that his almost category hostility towards lefties recently is just a dumb prejudice on his part. I do think there is some business logic there, if that makes sense. I think this is a part of the outrage. Online left debaters give good faith to alt-right, but they are hostile to black nationalists. Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair, actually. That being said, I don't think... I think weirdly, and it seems strange, because Vosh is a difficult character to judge, because he is... A lot of the qualities that I like about Vosh are actually flaws. Vosh is extremely arrogant. He is drunk on his own influence. And he has a very strong tendency to be uncharitable to people who are coming at him with very sincere critiques or responses or arguments or whatever. But I like that about him. And the reason why I like that about him is because people don't do that when they're cynical. I think weirdly being drunk on his success has almost saved his soul, if that makes sense. I think he makes the gaffes of an honest person who is blindly overshooting his competence. And I think that means that he's a real person. I find, like, when Destiny was going super easy on the Doomer Politics hit piece on Vosh, and just overlooking, like, blatant logical mistakes. Like, blatant. Brazen. That struck me as cynical. That struck me as he's smart enough to recognize the problems here. He knows the distinction between two different sentences with different imports. He's argued as much with people, right? Like, he's debated white nationalists. He knows the tricks. But he allows it to slide. Why? Because it targets someone whose who's suffering, whose harm is probably a better way to put it, whose downfall is beneficial to him, like in a very material way. Like, I had like speculations on my last Doomer Politics response video, which are speculations, purely speculations, but they're not far-fetched. There is money to be had by signaling to Sargon's audience, again, which is 3 times the size of Destiny's. Destiny is already very wealthy as far as anyone in this sphere is concerned, but 3 times. If he manages to double his viewing base just by appearing as if he is, especially since Sargon is in bad grace with a lot of, or is out of grace rather, with a lot of people in the right sphere. If he can signal to those people that, like, hey, I'm angry at the same things you are. I recognize that a lot of these people on the left are super unjust towards you. I'm going to attack them. There's money to be had there. There's a lot of money to be had there. It's like, here's how I would characterize it. I think Vosh's platform, for the most part, reaches out and grabs people, right? He appeals to people. Sometimes for honorable reasons, sometimes for dishonorable ones, but he appeals to people. He says, here's like some political positions I'm going to argue persuasively, if not necessarily like logically well, and you're going to like me for that. I'm going to deliver an argument in a way that, how do I want to say this? I'll just stick with the comparison at the base level. I think his platform is reaching out, right? I think Destiny's platform, by contrast, is about aligning your like closing off, but closing off in such a way that your enemies align with the enemies of people whose audiences you want to appeal to. Does that make sense? So when he says, I'm not engaging positively with lefties anymore, I'm making this up. I don't have an actual quote for this, but like, lefties are stupid, they're awful, yada, yada, yada. I've never been hurt by people more than I have been by lefties, things like that. Well, you know who else can say that? It's like anybody who enjoys and sympathizes with Sargon of Akkad or somebody like that, or Richard Spencer. So whether or not Destiny ever says like their talking points or agrees with them or demonstrates any respect for them whatsoever, these people know that, you know what, insofar as I identify primarily as the enemy of that, this person is, if not my friend, it's not my enemy. Aren't I advocating for him becoming the thing he hates? I don't know what you're referring to. Are we talking about Vosh? I mean, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I think internet debate culture in general is having a negative impact, not as serious as Twitter, but similar. I don't think the major figures in that sphere are necessarily pernicious. I think, I think the smaller ones are way worse, to be totally honest with you. I think Destiny, for example, like, he has some toxic encounters, but I think for the most part he takes sort of a distanced position, and he'll signal boost things. But like, his rhetoric itself is not what's particularly pernicious. I think that, yeah, I don't know. I guess in general, like, just drunkenly shooting off the cuff. I think people, like, Vosh clones or Vosh orbiters or whatever, they tend to be characterized by being sort of aggressive and performative, but not necessarily in like a super cynical sense. Like Demon Mama, for example, I think she has like a tendency to try and imitate sort of like a best hits moments of Vosh's career, and early on especially that tended to give her a bad rap because she would try to force an interaction that wasn't like appropriate to the conversation at hand. But I think she's generally sincere. I think by contrast, when you look at a lot of the people who orbit Destiny, there is a weird degree of comfort with just using what appears to be fairly deliberate appeal to right-wing actors or right-wing major like content creator figures. There's a weird comfort about carefully aligning yourself in such a way as not to offend them in particular, in such a way that you won't get their views, right? Django's video and defensive debate is excellent, IMO. I haven't watched Django's in a little while. I was really frustrated by his debate with the distributist because he clearly hadn't prepared, and he actually like froze up and lost it, which happens. I've done it. It was frustrating to see. But I think he's gotten better. I'm not a super fan of like the rap battle way in which he does it, but it's, you know, he's a smart cookie. I do like him as a person. Just, you know, it's the debate bro hustle, which I say I could never do that, but I think I actually held myself pretty well against Doomer politics, which surprised me. I've been super reticent about taking part in any debates because I hate the idea of my own nervousness and my own incompetence making a good idea or a good interpretation seem bad. Like, that's super important to me. It's not important to me that I successfully promote myself. It's really important to me that I not be the vehicle by which good things are made to seem worse, if that makes sense. Who's the distributist? You are better off not knowing who the distributist is. Imagine me if I was more sputtery and moronic, which is saying something, by the way. He's awful. He's the worst. The sort of incoherence we see from the Destiny sphere is why we need Stalinism. Stalinism. Anyways, let's watch this. I'm rambling off. And this is annoying. So let's go through this video and let's see what she has to say.
I guarantee you that give it a little bit of time, you motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous.
So when I watched this debate, I did not understand how this wasn't it for Vosh. In this debate, he says that black nationalists are the same as white nationalists.
Black nationalists are just white nationalists.
Individual black nationalists can be terrible people. I think that's legitimate. And I think, like, they're, like, for example, in the Nation of Islam, or, like, let's take Louis Farrakhan as an example. You have the same conspiracy theorizing about, like, Jewish dominance and stuff like that. Like, there are... You can say that there's a tendency for people in certain kinds of nationalist movements to exhibit certain toxic tendencies. So I don't think that is particularly off point. That being said, again, like, I don't have the original video for context, and I've seen Vaj make these clarifications in the past, but I'm so sorry. Excuse me. But I think it would behoove him in this context to really nail home the fact that at the very least, in the context of a black nationalist who is as toxic as a white nationalist, the black nationalist actually has a case. Like, a little bit of one. There's some precedent there. Nationalism is a vehicle. It can take you to where you're going or be the murder weapon in a hit and run, yeah. Again, that's politics, right? Like, it's a sandbox. It's terrifying. A really good book. Negative associations in the context of this topic. Where is it? Ah, here we are. You'll learn so much about political theory if you read this book. Unfortunately, a brilliant political theorist who happened to be a member of the Nazi Party, but I didn't say he was a good person, I said he was a good political theorist. Those two things rarely intertwine. Or, you know, Machiavelli. He actually was a decent person. Horrible sexist, though. Yeah, Malcolm X is fascinating. It's annoying that, like, the religious content of that book was so downplayed in the film. But... What book? Oh, sorry. I'm a super lightweight. I should never drink on stream again. But I'm talking about the Nomos of the Earth by Carl Schmitt, which is super hard to find. You can get it on LibGen for free, obviously. I am very much in favor of illegally downloading educational material. But if you want a hard copy, unfortunately, you have to give money to Telos Press. But it's very good. Think of it as like... Think of it as like modern Hobbes, basically. I say modern Hobbes, but Hobbes was modern. Or, you know, like, just Machiavelli. Like, this book has been ill-served by being treated as, like, for God's sake, this made me cringe so hard. In, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they find Zemo in prison, and he's reading The Prince. Why? Because, you know, he's a clever, evil genius, so he's reading The Prince. This guy is one of the most, like, morally concerned political thinkers in history. This is not, like... This is not the... He has a reputation of being the political philosopher who tells you, like, and this is how you gain power and control people and manipulate people. It's not what he's about. No, this is like a thoroughly Republican Democratic thinker who is explaining that in order to have a good community, that survives, you need to be just to your friends, and you need to be honest and sincere and brave and bold and all these other things. And you need to treat your people with respect, stuff like that. Like, Machiavelli is a massive moral inspiration. Like, there's one line in here that I love. Let me find it. It's in the later part of the book. Yeah, here we go. A prince is also respected when he is a true friend and a true enemy. That is, when he declares himself to be on the side of one prince against another without reserve. Such a policy will always be more useful than remaining neutral, for if two powerful neighbors of yours come to blows, they will be of the kind that when one has emerged victorious, you will either have cause to fear the victor or you will not. In either of these two cases, it will always be more useful for you to declare yourself and to wage open warfare. In the first case, if you do not disclose your intentions, you will always be the prey of whoever wins, to the delight and satisfaction of whoever loses, and you will have no reason at all why anyone should come to your assistance or take you in, because whoever wins does not want reluctant allies, who would not assist him in times of adversity. Whoever loses will not give you refuge, since you are unwilling to run the risk of sharing his fortune. Now, this sounds cynical, but what he's actually telling you is you need to be brave and loyal and stand up for things. Thoughts on Jonathan Bennett's simplified translations of people like Hobbes and Machiavelli? I don't know who that is. I'm so sorry. Have I seen The Good Place? I've seen clips of The Good Place in Perspective Philosophy's videos. Who I hate, by the way. I can say that now. Hate his stuff. Profoundly dishonest. There is a strong philosophical case to be made for veganism. He's more concerned with selling his brand, and I really don't like that. Actually, to the expense of veganism, because it appears to be based on his, as he frames it, on super tenuous readings of Hegel, which is somebody who is already, like, inscrutable to most readers, if indeed they read him. Hegel is freaking difficult. Super pretentious writer. Like, brilliant ideas, very worth getting into, but the way he writes... No, I mean, there's advantage. I'm going to walk that back a little bit. I won't say Hegel writes pretentiously. Hegel writes with an aim to you struggling with him and growing a reasoning apparatus that can converse with his ideas as a result. But using Hegelian language when you're making videos and talking to people, you need to be super specific with what you mean, because it is incredibly difficult for a layperson to understand Hegel. It takes so much work. Like, you can read Machiavelli and get something from it. It takes practice. Like, he's a thinker with, like, a lot of levels. Like, you can read him on one level as just like somebody giving you advice, as somebody in a situation where, you know, there are things that you have and there are things you want to gain. How do you gain them? How do you interact with the people around you? Stuff like that. But you can just pick him up and read him. You can't pick up the bloody science of logic and just start reading it. This thing is a monster. I mean, I flipped open to the introduction. I couldn't even understand that. Bloody difficult. Actually, this is one of the things that really turned me on to Haas from Infrared, because he's nuts. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, very difficult guy to get along with. But in his debate with Perspective Philosophy, he had a command of the material. Do you know how difficult it is to have like a ready command of Hegel in a debate? That's insane. This guy may be crazy, but he is smart. Really smart. Like, I have like a level of respect for Haas's intelligence that is completely in contrast to my level of respect for his conduct in debates. Like, a weird figure, but smart. That is surprising. You seem to kind of like him in your older content. I try to be generous as a rule. My generosity for Perspective Philosophy died when he started sharing that hit piece on Vosh, for two reasons. First of all, because it appears to me very strongly like he had a role in framing it, and secondly, because him signal boosting a video that is effectively slander, whether or not you can seriously criticize Vosh in a serious way, and I've made, again, most of my previous audience criticizing Vosh, which I hate, because that's like the least interesting part of my material. But like, as somebody who criticizes Vosh, I really hate that he was willing, just for purely invidious reasons, just to hurt somebody he hates, he was willing to promote something that has a wretchedly incoherent logical structure. The argumentation in that video is the most abominable thing I've ever seen. Okay, that's hyperbolic, but it was bad. It was really bad. Speaking of Perspective Philosophy, what was your debate about objective morality supposed to be about? Were you going to deny objective morality, argue that PP's argument is insufficient, etc.? Okay, so again, when we're talking about morality in a modern sense, we are talking again about duties. When you see apologists who are talking about like objective moral values and duties are always particular. They are particularized to a person, and they concern particular things. Do I have a duty to do X in this situation? They are always particular. This is the reason why Kant says that the only thing that can be determined to be moral, purely moral, qua the moral. This is a common misreading of Kant. Kant does not say that the only moral thing is a good will. Kant says that the only thing that you can determine to be moral is a good will. The moral qua the moral is as a universal, because the moral is, of course, the universal. When we break it right down, what we mean by the moral is that which you must do in all cases, universal. And what you must do in all cases is to will the good, definitionally. As soon as you have to will the good with respect to a thing or in a certain context, it's particularized. Now you're talking about not the good qua the good, you're talking about the good qua the human in a certain context, or the good qua the individual human in a certain context. This is why morality is downstream from ethics, because what your duties are has to do with what there is in the world. And what there is in the world is determined by the political context in which you find yourself, the social context in which you find yourself. You can't have duties with respect to a social body if the social body doesn't exist. You can't have duties with respect to, I don't know, like maybe let's pretend you're a reactionary for a second, human nature. Well, you need to have the human about you, right? Like, there are all these different things that feed into it. And bluntly, at the end of the day, like, his argument for objective morality rests on a bait and switch between morality and ethics that ignores that distinction. So he starts off saying that we're talking about morality wrong. Actually, what we're talking about is ethics, and then he switches to ethics. And then he starts bringing in that really, really bad argument by Alistair McIntyre, which tries to construe, again, the good in terms of the human being as... I'm misremembering this terribly, but the long and short of it is It's the Aristotelian idea that there is a best way for a human to be, and that is the actualization of all of the virtues, right? All of the best ways for a human as an activity, let's say, to be operating. You should make an Encyclopedia Politicon video on this subject. Yeah, I agree. I was going to on Ethos. So, or on ethics. Perspective philosophy has the same problem as Rem the Bath Boy, that no matter how solid their arguments or their philosophical chops are, they come off as smug and insufferable so no one listens. Well, some people listen. I think it's incorrect to think of perspective philosophy as a philosophy channel, sort of like how it's incorrect to think of Philosophy Tube as a philosophy channel. Perspective philosophy is a vegan channel. And sometimes, you know, his charm is effective, but his argumentation is really bad. He's very much about selling the novelty of being, of delivering an Hegelian defense of veganism or an argument for veganism over delivering a compelling argument for veganism, if that makes sense. Always beware of someone who, when they smile, their cheeks don't look goofy when they go up, because that's something practiced in the mirror. When people smile, they look stupid. I am so drunk right now. Have you heard of Kane B? His videos are philosophically rigorous and he's willing to chat with you about political philosophy. Has he said he's willing to chat with me specifically? Well, that's cool. I haven't heard of him, but that would be cool. I haven't been able to talk with anybody except for Zanzi, who's great. Zanzi is criminally underrated, by the way. And it's his own damn fault because he's terrible at marketing. But you should all check out Zanzi's channel. His stuff is fantastic. He's in the chat here, you can see him. If you search a video called Ideology and Final Fantasy VII, it sounds stupid, but it's brilliant. It's so good. You should watch that video. What's my opinion on Wes Cecil? I don't know who Wes Cecil is. We were supposed to be talking about this video on Vosh the Master Debater, and I just completely derailed myself. Oh, he said he's willing to chat with anyone. I thought it was special. That hurts. But yeah, sure, I'd chat with him. I hate talking to philosophers in general, not because I have low respect for, I have tremendous respect for actual philosophers, which is distinct, by the way, from somebody who has a philosophy degree. Philosophy is an activity you take part in. Actually, funnily enough, so the idea of screw it, I'm just going on tangents. So you've probably heard the term sophist applied as an insult, right? That's a specifically Platonic invention because Plato invents the idea of philosophy. Philosophy is a weird term. It means love of wisdom, right? Or love of truth, or something like that. Sophism, by contrast, was a term deployed not just to, bad philosophers, but to Socrates. Like if you, for example, if you read Aristophanes' The Clouds, he characterizes Socrates as a sophist. And when you think about it, it's actually not that derisive a term. It literally just means one who peddles, or one who peddles in wisdom. Or I guess that implies like one who does it for money. Let's say one who deals in wisdom. Or something. Like that's their activity. They are a wisdomist, right? Like the word is still wisdom. It's still Sophia, right? So, technically speaking, anybody who delivers wisdom as a service is a sophist. Now, Plato introduces this further qualification that someone who doesn't really love wisdom, who is motivated by other things, doesn't actually attain wisdom. They're sort of a fake, in a way. But that's very specific. And I like that distinction, because it clarifies something. But if we're being really particular here, technically, I'm a sophist. Perspective philosophy is a sophist. I don't know who Wes Cecil is, but he's probably a sophist too. But that's not like a negative description per se. Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. I am super derailed. Again, like I've had no sleep for the past 3 days. When I made that second Doomer Politics video, I was dealing with extreme insomnia. And I actually, like that was, did that premiere? Or did I just publish that? I published that at like 10 in the morning, I think. That had been finished at like 3 a.m. just because I couldn't sleep because it was annoying me. I had to finish it. Someone's gonna clip that. What are they gonna clip? What did I do? We're talking about genocide. Don't scare me like that. Is Philosophy Tube someone who does not love wisdom? Philosophy Tube loves makeup and money and being a philosophy channel. I don't think she's malicious, but I wouldn't characterize her as a philosopher. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's like a normal person with like a good gig. And I think that especially recently, and I think she has some help writing her more recent stuff, which is to her credit because her recent productions have been really good. And funny. And I couldn't say that about her earlier stuff. Her recent stuff has been comedy gold. Like I love that part in the when I covered the Confucius one with her, with Victor Magariano, and she was like, what did she say? This is another the dictionary refers to this as, we have stolen your dictionary, da 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 da, and then just carries on as if that's like the definition. That was so funny. I loved that. Her anti-Semitism video was okay. I had some issues with it, but I think it was okay. I didn't... She's better now that she can just make stuff for, like, now that she's secure, she doesn't have to weigh into, like ground level politics. She's okay. Pop education is fine. I can't even speak anymore. Pop education is fine. It's an important step in expanding the number of people willing to engage with topics. Yes, but it's dangerous because pop education done badly can actually give you the impression that something is less interesting or less deep, or requires less attention than it actually does. So pop education is super important, but it has to be done well. I would argue that the standards for pop education have to be orders of magnitude higher than for academic philosophy, because their people are trained to like discern stuff and to hold arguments in suspension. Like, okay, I see some problems here, but let's assume that it worked in this. Let's assume that it had the contextual grounding to work. How would we play this out? That kind of thing. When you're talking about people who haven't been accustomed to thinking that way, it can be massively misleading. Nothing is worse than teaching somebody that they understand something that they actually don't. Anyways, let's keep going. Let's actually watch this. We're gonna go through this, and I'm gonna try, guys. This was a stupid idea. This was such a stupid idea. I'm gonna get like just ridiculously. When I'm ridiculously tired, I'm going to drink on stream when I'm a lightweight, and I'm going to cover genocide. This was stupid. Who would I say a good pop educator is? Zanzi. Zanzi's video on ideology is excellent. I think Philosophy Tube has some good things. There's not a lot of them, frankly. A lot of them are really bad. Honestly, just read these people for yourself. If you can't get into a class or something. Oh, shoot. I can't believe I forgot him. I'm so sorry. Greg Sadler. His philosophy videos are fantastic. Super rigorous guy. He has a series called Half Hour Hegel. You will learn so much. He goes through the phenomenology of spirit. That's not phenomenology. He goes through this horribly frustrating book to read, line by line, and explains it. It's so good. Give it a look. Okay. We put this off enough. Let's watch Professor Flowers' video that got her into so much trouble.
Nationalists, except black.
He says that he doesn't care about black culture.
Well, black nationalists basically try to push for preserving not only black cultures, which I think is important to preserve.
Fuck black. I don't give a fuck about preserving culture.
He's making money while spouting misinformation about black people.
Yeah, that's nasty. I don't like that he said that. You can definitely criticize Wash for that one. I want to see the original context, but like, you should care about culture. Culture, again, is the ambience of morality, right? And culture is important. Culture frames who you are and how you relate to people and, you know, your sense of justice, yada, yada, yada.
My people were killed because they were different, forced to assimilate and lost. Why? White people don't understand shit, bruh. I'm so tired of this. Trying to defend my right to exist and be who I am, who my people are. You think that might be a little bit overdramatic?
When I saw this, I didn't understand how this wasn't it for...
Again, like, I don't know the exact context and what he was responding to before then, but that's pretty indefensible. Let there be no mistake, I am not a Vosh stan. I have criticisms. I just think he's also a person, so you shouldn't treat him like a piece of meat to be feasted on like we're vultures, right? Oh, cuck philosophy. I forgot cuck philosophy. Cuck philosophy is very good. And he made a terrible mistake. See, he changed his name to Jonas Seika, or however you pronounce that, and it has like weird punctuation that you can't put into... that normal people cannot type. I suggested he put a duckbill over his face and call it duck philosophy, and I thought that was brilliant, but nobody listens to me, despite the fact that I know everything.
Vosh. Towards the end of the debate, he admits that what D.I. Angel is saying is fine, but ultimately, he still believes...
Vosh is infamous for, and I think this is unfair, for comparing child pornography to buying the products of child labor, which is a massively misread point, I think maliciously misread, because the point he's making clearly is that, like, we shouldn't be buying stuff made by child labor, not that, oh, you know, I guess child pornography isn't that bad. But also that in conjunction with, like, a history of being a sex pest in a certain context online. If that hasn't killed him, this isn't going to, so I think that's a little bit silly.
The white nationalists and the black nationalists in America get along for the most part.
And it seems like a lot of white people who watched this didn't understand how wild this was for the black people watching. To see Vosh not know what black nationalism is, debate it, and then feel so confident in his misunderstanding that he calls black nationalists you motherfuckers. And to come out of that without his community batting an eye is wild.
I don't think his community didn't bat an eye. I think a lot of people in his community were critical of that. I think they were still in his community afterwards. Don't get me wrong, I think that was a really bad thing he said. I don't think there's a defense of that. This is not a defense of Professor Flowers, by the way, but this is pretty bad.
Sure, maybe you would expect to explain that black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism to right-wingers. Sure, maybe you would expect to have to explain that black nationalism isn't the same as white nationalism to the same people who are banning critical race theory. Sure, maybe you would think you'd have to explain this to the same people who think that Antifa is an organization.
I think that's actually on point. Especially since, again, like I brought this up in the second Doomer Politics response video. Often as a defense, a lot of white nationalists will say that actually they have love for all the races. They just want them to, you know, retain their integrity and their uniqueness by being, you know, unpolluted by other races. And, like, it's patently obvious what they're doing, but, like, it sounds on paper relatively benign because the motive isn't hatred. It's just a really problematic understanding of what constitutes, you know, a community in a meaningful sense. Characterizing them as identical in this way, yeah, it's sort of, it's not great. What was the year that that conversation took place? Like, that looks like a dark room Vosh is in. Vosh has gotten better recently. He had some yikesy moments in the past. They batted many eyes. His audience gave him lots of shit. Yeah, I saw that too. Like, I'm in his server. I saw people get really pissy about that, and justly so. Again, like, I'm put in the awkward position of having to defend Vosh now because of the Doomer Politics thing. I think he has a lot of problems, and he says stupid stuff. I also think that that's one of his redeeming qualities. That's the sign of somebody who's non-cynical, who's just running off the cuff and making stupid statements. It's irresponsible, but not irresponsible in a callous way. He is being callous, by the way, in this conversation here. But, like, I think you could talk to him about this as a non-antagonist and get him to acknowledge what he did. And I can't say that about a lot of people on this platform. But yeah, this is objectively bad.
But not back to white leftists. I mean, sure, there's racial issues with white leftists, but sure.
It's important to note that he walked that back within a couple of days after the debate. That was wise if he did. The catch is, of course, is that once you catch flack for it, and this, by the way, going back to the Kant thing, this is why you can't characterize particulars as the moral qua the moral, because there's always little pressures that you can't even detect, or like parse out and clarify before your brain for why you do a thing. Like when somebody asks for forgiveness or walks back a statement after they've been punished for it, there are now subsidiary reasons to the good for why they are doing so, right? But yeah, that is good if you walk that back, because these are pretty terrible statements.
Surely, it can't be so bad that this is where we're at. Boy, was I wrong. Black nationalists aren't the same as white nationalists. We'll just start off with that. In case anyone isn't sure of white nationalism is the belief that white people are the more intelligent and superior race.
Okay, so Ice Yuru, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Flowers did defend genocide in her debate with Vosh. Now, I've seen a portion of the debate. You've seen that I've seen a portion of the debate. A very small fraction. Can you tell me where I should look for the definitive statement or the definitive point, rather, where Flowers defends genocide? Because I didn't see her defend genocide. I saw her be really assiduous about not condemning people who have genocidal, or what we would characterize as genocidal proclivities. Not necessarily a massive improvement, but there is a difference. Can you specify? That would help. It's sincerely, like, I'm not challenging you on this. I'm approaching this for the first time. Like, let's look at this. Can you tell me, like, what section, roughly? Like here we have a section that no group is inherently more evil than any other group. She doesn't defend it, she supports whatever they choose to do. Does she support whatever they choose to do, or does she state as a fact that it's up to whoever chooses to choose what to do? Because that's a fact, right? That's not a question, that's not a determination of right or wrong. Like, whoever has the ability to choose has the ability to choose, and whoever isn't that doesn't have the ability to choose. She never explicitly does it? Okay. If this first section here is representative, then my inclination is to be generous, because as a political theorist, I know that there is a strong culture of not imposing a specific cultural morality, which all morality is, on political action. Because political action, again, is prior to culture, right? It's talking about the establishing. I mean, it's partially talking about the what underlies a community and its norms. Talk more about Hegel? I am not stupid enough to talk more about Hegel. Frankly, I think 90% of people who talk about Hegel have no idea what Hegel is saying. And that includes me. Hegel is really difficult. It takes I've read now 3 books by Hegel, and I still am not like 100% confident that I understand Hegel. It's really bloody difficult. By the way, I can prove definitively that I have read Hegel. Where are you? Where are you? You're somewhere here. Aha! Here I have Hegel's Philosophy of Right. Every single page has notes that I have written on it. Look in the margins. Like, look at this. Look, I'm writing on everything. I've rewritten every single section in my own words. I've read Hegel. I am not confident that I understand Hegel. Hegel is hard. That took me like 3 months. It's okay, you could talk about Hegel and no one would call you out on it. That's the problem. Nobody could call me out on it. So if I BS you, there's no way to, there's nothing holding me to account. That's the problem. I hate lying. I can't lie. So at 109, okay. Here we go. 109. Let's start at 105, okay? Because I want to be fair. Let's start here. And this section is called, You Keep Talking About Colonization as a Socioeconomic Phenomenon and Relating It to the Lives of Millions of People. Where's the whole sentence? I can't even see it. Okay, we're just going to watch this, and 1 hour and 7 minutes. We're starting at 1 hour and 5 minutes, okay? I want to have as much context as possible reasonably. We'll start here, and we'll just go through it. I'm going to put it at 125. and we'll see. Hopefully this like gives us some clarity as to what the controversy is.
That at any point during this conversation?
You did try to actually say
I
that it
never.
happened, that colonization happened a bit ago, and that I can't somehow break apart the fact that colonization happened and that white people aren't literally colonizers.
I encourage you
because
to
what I'm saying
review
is
this
that they're
VOD.
still profiting off of colonization.
I encourage you to review this VOD. I have never said anything of the sort. The point that I'm making is that the moral culpability of the act of colonization is not one which is currently being borne by the majority of white South Africans. I'll ask you another direct question. Do you think
But the thing is,
it's
those
possible
people are not trying to dismantle the powers of
do you think
colonization.
those 6 million people, you know that? Have you talked to them? Or are you making a group generalization about a race again? I'll ask you
I'm
another...
sorry. Most of the people are not trying to dismantle the powers of colonization.
I'll ask you another question. Do you think it's possible for a white person to live ethically in South Africa?
Yeah, I already actually said that.
How would they do so?
I think they can live there ethically by, this is my thoughts on it. I'm not South African, so I don't want to speak for South African people. But I think that if they lived there, tried to also fight against the racist structures that are still in place, try to fight against colonialism, try to give back to Black communities, I think that would be an ethical way to live there.
Okay, so what if they did that and then the state tried to deport them anyway? You've called them a colonizer, by the way. You've said that the white people in South Africa are a colonizer. You don't know how many of them are already doing that. You have no goddamn idea, but you painted the whole racial group as existing current colonizers anyway, which implicitly suggests they're not capable of living there ethically. Do you think it's odd that you're willing to, by default,
About
condemn
them
an
being
entire
able to
race?
live there ethically. It's about who has the power. And right now, the people who have colonized that place have the power. And so how do you dismantle that power?
Do you think you could
That's
do
what
it
it's
without
about.
deporting a race? Do you think that's possible?
I think you could. And that's what I've been saying this whole time.
Then it's unethical to then do a genocide. If you have the ability to fix the power differential without genocide, but then you do genocide anyway, that's pretty bad, right?
I would say so, yeah. But I also think like a lot of people aren't doing that. I think a lot of people who are figuring out how to get rid of colonialism, it's pretty complicated. Like there's like the Mau Maus in Kenya, for example. They had to like kill a lot of people, but they also were parts of ending British colonialism. Like what I'm saying is that colonialism is very messy, and there's instances where it's ideal if people can end it peacefully. There's instances where it hasn't been peaceful. And I think it's like, who are you to judge? Because you're not the person who's been colonized. That's what I'm getting
judge.
at.
Yeah, I'll judge. I judge the
Oh, I
Israelis
know
for
you
how they
will.
treat the Palestinians. Yeah, I do actually think that members of oppressed...
That's a bad example.
a lot of them...
Oh my god, why is it doing that? It just jumped right back to the beginning. That's... God damn it. Okay, where were we about? 107, I think? That's a bad example because the state of Israel is not equivalent. It's not a colonized people. It's a superimposed state over a people that was already native there.
But I also think like a lot of people aren't doing that. I think
things. I do believe that.
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are people.
Sorry, I'm jumping around because for some reason it just automatically skipped back to the beginning of the video. This is so frustrating. I hate YouTube. Also, has anybody been experiencing this recently? When you open up your channel page, it's just like everything's like wonky. Like the top tabs are on the side. Like what the hell? Okay, let's I'm going to go back to 646 because that seems to be a thing that this arbitrarily lands on, and we're going to watch from here, okay?
Which implicitly suggests they're not capable of living there ethically. So,
Hours of colonization.
I'll ask you another question. Do you think it's possible for a white person to live ethically in South Africa?
Yeah, I already actually said that.
How would they do so?
I think they can live there ethically by, this is my thoughts on it. I'm not South African, so I don't want to speak for South African people. But I think that if they lived there, tried to also fight against the racist structures that are still in place, try to fight against colonialism, try to give back to Black communities, I think that would be an ethical way to live there.
Okay, so what if they did that and the state tried to deport them anyway? You've called them a colonizer, by the way. You've said that the white people in South Africa are a colonizer. You don't know how many of them are already doing that. You have no goddamn idea, but you painted the whole racial group as existing current colonizers anyway, which implicitly suggests they're not capable of living there ethically. Do you think it's odd that you're willing to, by default,
About them
condemn an
being
entire
able to
race?
live there.
Okay, so No Vincent Hosek asks actually a very apropos question. The question should be why I cannot judge. We're thinking about this in the wrong way. You're thinking about why can't I judge in a normative sense. But the real question is why can't you judge? Well, you can't judge because you aren't in a position to actually render a judgment in a practical way. you aren't able to decide on a verdict, right? Then you can, in your head, you can say, like, I judge this to be bad, yada, yada, yada. But in politics, who is the judge is the sovereign. It's who can actually enact what is the exception. It's who can allow and who can disallow. And that's super practical. And what I'm hearing from her so far, and I'm going to let this roll on a little bit, is she is talking very, very poorly. Like, this is on her. She didn't prepare for this adequately, in my opinion. But she's talking about a political fact, that politics acts beyond morality, right? Like, our concepts of morality are socially constructed. They aren't handed to us down by God. And by the way, for those who argue that they are handed to us down by God, God speaks in Genesis the existence of the world. It's an arbitrary act. There's nothing in the world by itself that actually normatively compels us, right? At the end of the day, all you have is what you will and what you will not. That's politics. And you know what? When you've grown up sort of treating morality as this like deific thing, as this like this ultimate concern of some kind, that seems like it's impoverishing, but it's actually not. That's actually grander than morality. That is what you will in the world is an expression of your spirit. That is more than morality. Morality, insofar as it is morality, is the spirit of reason or something like that, right? But if you're in a world that is irrational, if you're in a world where things just happen, where the constants that frame reality come about by perhaps not even God knows how, then that's the greatest thing that there is the fact that there is a spirit that is actually willing something into existence. Does that make sense? It probably doesn't. That's very strange language, but see, I think she needed to like really get off Vosh's case here. She needed to step back and say, like, look, what I'm talking about is at the level of power, right? Like, we both agree by temperament and by proclivity, by preference, that killing people and hurting people and taking stuff from people, taking things from people that they need to be like happy and productive and to have like meaningful relationships, yada yada yada, that's bad. We don't like that. But at the same time, that is something that will happen, immaterial of our preferences, regardless of which side in any contention prevails. So practically, as opposed to by preference, practically, or if you want to like stretch it a bit more, by taste, right? Like maybe we have a picture in our head of what the ideal person is, or what like a good relationship with your community is, or a good community in a general sense. But practically, at the end of the day, the people who have the power to do what they will do what they will. And my personal normative preferences, or sorry, what I would prefer to be the norms by which they would abide, practically doesn't mean anything. And that's honest. The trick, though, is that expressing that seems to give license to people who would do things that you would not will, right? So, by saying that at a certain level, the only thing that, like, how do I want to phrase this? By stating that will sort of supersedes morality, you give license to people who would do these terrible things. And I think what she really should be doing is saying, like, look, like, practically, it's not up to me. Practically, the people who actually perform the revolution, they're going to be the ones who decide what the shape of the future is going to be. And if it is truly a shape of the future, it will be a shape that hasn't been hitherto represented in the world, so I actually have no way of knowing what that even would look like. But nonetheless, like, I will say this, like, do we really want to reify the crimes as well as the categories of our predecessors? Something like that. Like, don't we want to be better? Or don't we want to be different if better is not a meaningful distinction? Good night, Horizonberg. Thanks for joining me. I hope I haven't devolved into total incoherence, but, you know. I'm feeling so much more awake now. Alcohol is a wonderful stimulant. I had so much to be depressed about this week, and it's all gone. Beautiful. But yeah, thank you for joining us, Horizonberg. And welcome again to anybody who's new to the channel. We had a bunch of new people all of a sudden, obviously because the golden touch of Vosh has been bestowed upon us, but welcome. I am surprised that we have no hate watchers. I've seen no, like, crude comments whatsoever. Just people with, like, earnest questions that I'm too drunk to answer or notice, and I'm so sorry. I really am. I am so sorry. But I'm very pleasantly surprised. I was anticipating that I would start the stream and I would have a million Sargonites, etc. And I used to be one, so, like, I get it. But I was anticipating having so many people just, like, cussing me out, and it's been lovely. What an intelligent and inquisitive audience. I am blessed. Thank you. Sid says, I think she is saying that since the structures at hand benefit the white race in places like SA, are not exactly being dismantled in a visible fashion, that political violence of the oppressed is fine. I don't think she's saying it's fine. I think she's saying something very poorly. I think she's saying that at the end of the day, her normative preferences don't have import here. Because we are talking about a situation of, we're talking about a relocation of the decision from one entity to another. Now, I would say as a retort that insofar as we're still assuming the state form, insofar as we're still naively inheriting the categories of colonialism, which include the categories of race, actually we're not inheriting the decision. And by we, I mean the revolutionaries of a African nation, say. We're actually not. We're blindly accepting the decision of a long-dead ghost of a colonial state, if that makes sense. That would be Marx's critique, roughly, is that they're still repeating the poetry of the past. They're reifying the oppressive structures, even in the act of removing them, right? Vosh okay, Sargon bad, Stalin very bad. Sargon is definitely bad. I'm so disappointed in Sargon, which I know sounds like a stupid thing to say, but back in the day, when Sargon was fresh, when I wasn't in university, and when my only exposure to, like, because I come from a conservative household originally, when my only exposure to so many of these things was through people responding to all of these clips that came out of you know, like, bullying people who used feminism as a justification for treating random strangers meanly, or at least it appeared to be that way. Sargon seemed to be, at the very least, flexible in a way and spontaneous in a way that indicated that there was an actual person there. When I saw his response to me, and I didn't take this personally, what struck me the most was just the roboticness of his delivery. Like, it was automatic. You could predict what he was going to say. There's not a person behind his eyes anymore. Like, it's sad. For people who followed this channel from the beginning, and I recognize there's very few of you, I actually made a video where I described Sargon as kingly. How embarrassing is that? Like, kingly. because I still retain some memory of him as being like flexible and real, and having some virtue, some virtue of personality or something. And I look at him now, and there's just nothing. He may as well be a statue. There's not a human being behind those eyes anymore. It's just a stomach. There are things that he hates, and there's things that he's hungry for, and that defines him. And it's horrific. I think that's what's really horrifying about online politics generally. And I feel this too. Like the hunger to escape work, to be able to just talk. Like, this is what's kind of spooky. Like, I'm talking to you, right? But I don't see you. I'm looking at, like, a little device. I don't see your faces. Maybe you're all scowling at me. I don't know. But I'm talking to you like you're a person. It's horrific. It really is. Like, it's actually really scary just how inauthentic this is, like, categorically. I'm expressing myself and gesticulating within mind the fact that I am within a square frame on a camera. I have no idea what the uptake is. Similarly, like, I criticize people on this platform who are doing exactly the same thing, using the same methods. Like, when we're engaging in this way, we're not treating people like human beings because we're not treating human beings. We're treating their representations, or if indeed they're their representations, these are curated representations. You wouldn't want to see me right now. I'm sitting on the toilet. Hey, for all you know, so am I. You don't know what the architecture of my house is. Yeah. This is why you shouldn't drink on stream, people. But yes. I'm so sorry for any radical socialists or, God forbid, tankies in my audience, but Stalin was pretty bad. Now, I will say this. There are things that, again, mitigate the extreme actions of certain political communities or governments, let's say. Again, like extreme circumstances and extreme international opposition, things like that. These can have a tendency, again, like when you're unjust to people, that makes them less just. Well, similarly, people get tired, right? People get tired and they give in. And they do the easy thing, or they become paranoid. President Sunday Baudrillard says that profound protest cannot come from these forms of mediation as they determine all possibilities of exchange. Profound protest. Interesting. I like that. I like that term. Thank you. Like, here's something scary. Like, I laughed. Do you think I laugh like that in real life? No. I laughed in a way that you can hear it. This is horrifying, guys. This is really scary. If this consumes your life, if this is all you do... And this is scary, too. I have caught myself in real life talking to people and employing things that I have used to interact with the camera. And I've got no following, and I'm doing that. This consumes your soul. Kind of off-topic question, but you've mentioned being right-wing multiple times before. Was there anything in particular that moved you towards the left, person, book, etc.? Actually, it's interesting. So I grew up in what you would characterize as a conservative household. But a lot of conservative households aren't self-consciously conservative. They don't choose to be conservative. They have certain norms and certain things that they regard as ideal, yada, yada, yada. They see that other groups don't hold those things don't assign value to those things. Recognize those other groups identify them as conservative and therefore identify as conservative. In truth, we aren't conserving anything. We've been identified by stuff to which we are opposed. So what I determined growing up was that actually all of these things that I had been grown up to, all these things that I had been raised to value, you know, cringy things, defend the weak, love is the highest thing that you can be motivated by, take care of your family, stuff like that. I recognize that despite using that lingo, politically, everybody who was right-wing was adamantly against it, was all for callously allowing people to die if they didn't perform, for insisting on the atomization of families. Every single generation is supposed to go out with nothing and just act in as bad faith and a greedy manner as possible to build themselves up so they can raise kids who hate them to repeat the cycle ad nauseum. I saw that the attitudes of people who identified as conservative in the media was anti-intellectual and cruel. And I recognized that if I was going to be actually consistent to the stuff that I cared about, I wasn't going to align myself with them. It's also, interestingly enough, the reason why I don't identify as Christian, despite the fact that I was raised that way. And it's because by taking on that label, and I mean, I am ambiguous about the existence of God and things like that. I have no idea if any of the stuff in the Bible actually happened or even has any connection to anything that actually happened. But there's stuff that I inherited from that I still love, that orient my character to caring about people more than things, stuff like that. And yet, despite that, I can't assume that label, because doing so is effectively to ratify people who are the opposite. So, I've heard this elsewhere, but Hawes mentioned it recently. He said something to the effect of like, only atheists can commune with God. Let's bring this back to the morality question. We can't be clear that we are doing the moral thing in any situation because we don't actually know what's feeding into our motives. We don't know if we're doing it because it feels good. We don't know if we're doing it because we're afraid of the consequences of not doing it at some level. Like, we aren't even aware of our motives. Similarly, if you say you love God, say, that becomes suspect when you believe God exists, because now there are rewards, psychological or otherwise, for believing in God. Whereas it's possible for an atheist to love the idea of God and love God more than a Christian does, despite not believing he exists. The world's weird. It's really weird. Yeah. We're supposed to be watching Professor Flowers. This got a bit more intimate than I was going for. Let's press on. Let's actually see what she has to say, so I'm not accused of false advertising by Doomer at some point.
Ethically, it's about who has the power. And right now, the people who have colonized that place have the power. And so how do you dismantle that power?
Do you think you could do it without deporting a race? Do you think that's possible?
I think you could, and that's what I've been saying this whole time.
Then it's unethical to then do a genocide. If you have the ability to fix the power differential without genocide, but then you do genocide anyway, that's pretty bad, right?
I would say so, yeah. But I also think like a lot of people aren't doing that. I think a lot of people who are figuring out how to get rid of colonialism, it's pretty complicated. Like there's like the Mau Maus in Kenya, for example. They had to like kill a lot of people, but they also were parts of ending British colonialism. Like what I'm saying is that colonialism is very messy, and there's instances where it's ideal if people can end it peacefully. There's instances where it hasn't been peaceful. And I think it's like, who are you to judge? Because you're not the person who's been colonized. That's what I'm getting
judge.
at.
Yeah, I'll judge. I judge the Israelis.
Okay, so he winced there. Who are you to judge? And he said, and I give him credit for this, I'll judge. And yeah, you will judge in your chair. That's what she's getting at. What she's getting at is that you don't have the capacity to enact your judgment. This isn't even just a standpoint thing. This has to do with the fact that Vosh is not actually the decision maker in that context. So they're talking past each other, but in a subtle way. Vosh is talking about what he would will if he were there. She is talking about, and I'm so sorry I paused you on that expression, Professor Flowers. She is talking about what they will given they are there. These are radically different things. So I think that's the principal issue here. Now, she's not being careful. She needs to explain this very clearly, because what she is saying is not a normative assent to them doing that, but she's giving the impression that it is. And you need to have a certain level of know-how to discern that, I think, which is scary. But I think what she's doing is less bad than it sounds, but it does sound bad. Like, it sounds really bad. So this is on her, but I don't think she's inherently wrong, if that makes sense. Which, by the way, is not me, like, valorizing that either. The point is that we're, again, operating in a realm beyond norms, right?
For how they treat the Palestinian. Yeah, I do actually think that members of oppressed groups can do morally wrong things. I do believe that.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are people, there are all these different countries who have dealt with colonialism in a multitude of different ways. And sometimes it's been violent, and luckily sometimes it hasn't been. And my point is that people need to determine that. We need to look at each situation and the situation that people are in, because again, we're talking about various different countries.
So what
we're
if
not
it
just
turned
talking
out,
about like monolithic people.
What if people thought within a country that the only way for them to escape colonialism, read racial diversity in their country, was through the wholesale slaughter of the white people who lived there? Do you think that would be justified? Like, if they were like, this is how we're determining our decolonization, would you have a problem with that?
I think that would be pretty messed up, actually. Again, like, I'm not a separatist, but I think people should decide what they need to do. And I also think realistically that just would never happen, because it's just really impractical on multiple levels.
So
like,
you think it's bad, but
that's naive. Practicality doesn't actually determine human action. We do stuff we do impractical things all the time, because we have other drives than just pure utility, right? So that is naive. That being said, from what I've seen here, guys, she's not advocating genocide. And she's not insufficiently against genocide. What she is terrible at explicating that. Terrible. Terrible, terrible. And I think engaging with Vosh was vain and irresponsible. But I don't think she's advocating for genocide. But I don't think Vosh is at fault for thinking she is. This is just a tragedy. That's all this is. Vosh thinks that she really believes that her project doesn't inherently lead to genocide. I believe that too. I don't think she's for genocide. I think there's some like real political realism sort of meshed in here, and she's a well-educated woman, don't get me wrong, but she's not as smart as she thinks she is. And she delivered this terribly, and that's on her. But yeah, I don't think she's the kind of thing that she framed herself as being in this conversation. But unfortunately, the world doesn't judge us by what we are. The world judges us by what we do, as well as what we are. And she portrayed herself as a pro-genocide figure. And horrifically, this will not just mean that she is torched as being a pro-genocide figure. This will mean that a lot of people who follow her will also follow her because they think she's a pro-genocide figure. It's a mess. From the 3 minutes of this video, we have watched them on our side. And that's something else too. We've only had time to watch a few minutes. I'm going to go through this whole thing myself later. I'm going to have a more fleshed out judgment on it. But yeah. If Vosh tried listening to her, she could present her position better. Maybe. But a lot of what she's saying right now is driven by, again, an unnecessary antagonism to Vosh. I think people make a mistake. Because they're critical of Vosh, they think they need to bear out these criticisms in their manner when they actually communicate with him. But I think Hakeem, whatever else may be said about him, Hakeem was very wise. When he came onto Vosh, he was super conciliatory, super pleasant, super civil. He had no antagonism to Vosh whatsoever. They had a great conversation. Vosh unfairly attacked him afterwards, and also a little bit fairly too. But he was so smart. Whatever else can be said about him, I have serious disagreements with Hakeem. Smart as a tack. Very smart guy. Smarter than 90% of people who have made it to this point. That's why he's grown so much. He knew that once he had Vosh's audience, he didn't need to fight him anymore. She doesn't know that. She thinks she needs to beat Vosh. You can't beat Vosh. You're smaller than Vosh. You're more fringe than Vosh is. You can't. Vosh is so big relative to you that he's a part of the landscape. Which is one of the reasons why people don't treat him as a person anymore. This is one of the reasons that I came so hard against the Doomer Politics video, because it's representative of everything I hate in this sphere. It treated a person like a piece of meat. And don't get me wrong, he's hardly unique in this respect, but this was brazen. I don't think Vosh is being unfair to her. I think they just aren't communicating. Yeah, they're both incompetent to this. They're both not competent to carry on this kind of discussion. This is a super complicated, super delicate topic. This wasn't the way to do it. And I'm not even going to assign blame here, because I don't know that either of them even knew that this wasn't the way to do it. But this wasn't the way to do it. Vosh has this thing at the top of his channel, or he used to. I haven't seen it in a little while. But it's like, politics is dumb but very important. Politics is boring but very important in a lot of ways. And that boring stuff is crucial. If you only pay attention to the fun stuff, you don't know jack. Otherwise, everybody would know everything, right? If it didn't hurt to learn, everybody would know everything. I've said this before, trying to beat Vosh via debate when you're smaller is like trying to take down Drake's career via rap diss. That's funny. But, with a moderator, with an audience, I think you could beat Vosh. Vosh is beatable. You just have to know your stuff. You have to know your stuff, and you have to know your opponent. And you have to have guts. But, next 4 minutes are worth it. I'll tell you what, I'm going to get some water, and then we'll do the next 4 minutes. How long have we been going for? I don't want to be hogging the living room all night. Holy crap, we are at 3 hours. And I've retained you for... I've retained 60 of you for this long? Really? Are you so bored that you're watching me for 3 hours? What is wrong with you? Will I debate Hakeem one day? I don't know. In fact, I will not debate people generally unless I can live with them winning, or I know I will win. Because political debates aren't like esoteric philosophical debates where the consequences are academic. The consequences of allowing, like say, somebody with very practical aims in mind win is that those practical aims are more likely to happen. You may not like him, but I think perspective philosophy definitely beat Vosh. I think perspective philosophy did beat Vosh, but I don't think his arguments were good. For the reasons I gave. But I think he did beat Vosh. Like, don't get me wrong. I think he looked terrible in that debate, but I think he did beat Vosh. He had a command of the material that Vosh didn't have, and that's just a fact. Winning a debate is not a sign of having better ideas. It's an art separate from the art of acquiring knowledge. It's either this or Vosh's game stream. I want to watch Vosh's game stream. Actually, I wonder. Let's pop in there quickly.
Limited area we're given. The mushroom acts as a roof over the highest available ground to jump from, which gives us almost no room to move. I spent a long time looking at potentially jumping to it from elsewhere, like the giant tree in the center of the level, but getting up that thing is its own challenge, way more trouble than it's worth. Instead, we're gonna make you...
You think...
Unbelievable. It's a fundraiser for Planned Parenthood. Yeah, I saw that. When are you and Perspective Philosophy going to have a talk? I don't think after I called him out in the last video he's ever going to talk to me again. He's blocked me on Twitter. And frankly, good riddance. I don't want to talk to him. I'll tell you why. Because I know exactly why I object to his arguments, and I don't trust myself to be able to outmaneuver him in conversation. Among other things, because I haven't figured out this bloody mic technology. When I was talking to Booksmarts on Chudlogic Stream the other day, I was coming across like I was in the middle of a tunnel. He was coming across super crisp and booming. He could just talk over me at will. I don't like that. That's bad. 78,000 raised, damn. No, I'm not going to have a conversation with Perspective Philosophy. I may make a definitive video essay explaining why his his argument for objective morality is false, just out of pure spite at this point. I don't think anybody's actually bought it. But no, I'm not going to be debating him, I don't think. Unless he challenges me. I mean, initially he did challenge me. It was funny when he was saying on Twitter that I was chasing him for clout. What actually happened was I told him, like, you sharing this Doomer Politics video reflects super badly on you. And then after he was defensive about that, I eventually said, like, yeah, okay, well, own your pet, referring to Demon Politics, which I realized was like a weird sounding retort. And then I said, so when are we debating objective morality? Not because I'm super keen to. He invited me to talk about it months ago after I made my initial stream critique. I was just like, fuck it, let's get it on if we're doing this. And he characterized that, of course, as like, I'm chasing him for clout. It's like, why would I interact with somebody who I've given a platform to? Like, literally, I got the you're paid an exposure treatment you owe me now. It's just silly. Do the has thing and just turn the gain all the way up and yell right into the mic. Actually, funnily enough, so if you saw my appearance on Vosh, I was drinking one of these and I was equally drunk. But I sounded super bad, like I was in like a tank or something. Like the audio was super terrible. That was the same day as I had that conversation with Booksmarts, and I was super angry that my audio was so bad and it's coming in through so weak. So I just jammed my gain way up, and I forgot to turn it back down when I actually got on Vosh on a lark. So that was funny. Booksmarts was completely intellectually dishonest when he spoke with you. Yes, he was, but he's not as clever as he thought he was, because he told me so much in that conversation. And if he lied, you know what? That's on him. But yeah, Booksmarts isn't a smart guy. He's really not. This is who Booksmarts thinks he is. Who he really is the car salesman father from Matilda. President Sunday, do you think it's dangerous or at least naive to think politics isn't boring and instead is incredibly interesting? No, I think politics is incredibly interesting. That's why I've devoted my life to thinking about it, despite the fact that it gets me nothing. No, it's super interesting if you're doing it right. I find a lot of the conversations on YouTube are about policy, which is inherently boring because you're not talking about the real existential stakes. Has his total word salad? I disagree. I think he has moments, but I actually think Has is the real deal. However, I don't know how much is like a personality for the screen and how much is his actual like sincere personality coming forward. I think a lot of it is. Has is very smart. He has a super toxic image that's a part of his brand, but he's smart. You cannot accuse Has of being stupid. He's art, exactly. Booksmarts is extremely young. Is he younger? I don't know how young he is. I don't know if that's depressing. If he's like 20? Oh god. That's depressing. Doomer Politics is like 33. Which is terrifying. There but for the grace of God go I suppose. Really? Booksmarts is 20? That's unfortunate. That's just bloody unfortunate. I feel bad now. Not that bad, but I feel bad. Honestly, like I came pretty hard against Booksmarts for writing graduate papers and for researching and writing graduate papers, which is deeply unethical, and he acknowledges that. Which, by the way, is not a mark in his favor, because if he's willing to acknowledge doing something unethical, if he's willing to do something unethical, well, mischaracterizing his motives is also unethical, right? That's the problem with when you lie or when you do stuff that's unethical, is that, like, we can't trust anything you do anymore. Yeah, I know, right? A 20-year-old proofread a 33-year-old. At a certain point, age stops mattering. There are people vastly more educated than I am who are a fraction of my age. There are people vastly less educated than I am who are like oh god, I'm older than I thought. We're like 2 times my age. So When I watched Has versus Zoltanis on fascism, it seemed Has lost. Really? Zoltanis is like one of the most fallen from grace. Not that he was ever in grace, but he's like, this is the guy who was in the news because he went on his was it Telegram or something? He went into some chat thing and was like, because he was a part of the National Guard, and he was like, we're being dispatched to, you know, put a BLM riot under control, and they're giving us real ammo. This is exciting. Like, he's a psychopath. Has a smart. I don't agree with him on a lot, but you have to respect his intelligence. Like, it may make us feel better. There's this one part of I hate this series because it's really badly done, but the Man in the High Castle, if you ever watched it, one of the main characters is is Obergruppenführer Smith, who's like a secret policeman in Nazi-controlled America, played by Rufus Sewell, and his caravan, or his entourage, gets attacked in the street, and he loses a few guys, and as he's walking in, they're like, these stupid inferior rebels or whatever, I can't say the word on stream, and I don't want to anyways, we'll catch them, and whatever, they're incompetent, yada yada. He's like, it may make you feel better to characterize your enemies as weak and stupid and inferior, but they dealt us a serious blow today. I think respecting your opponents, even if just respecting their capacities, is super important. I think when a lot of people, like critics of Vosh even, like this is a good example, he's on the screen right now. It's over there. That is so weird. I've been gesticulating with right and left mixed. Because it's left for me. Anyways, I think a lot of people perform poorly talking to Vosh because they don't respect him. They think because they can critique his arguments on stream in a video response that therefore they are up to the task of beating him in a live conversation in which he holds all the buttons. That's a mistake. That's a deep mistake. Has just yells in every debate. That's not true. I used to think that, but I've seen him in debates where he's performed very well. Very well. I think he misjudges a lot of interactions where he thinks that it's appropriate to try and beat down your opponent by yelling and whatnot, but he can perform well when he's like in the right mindset. I would pay attention to him. Not agree with him, but I'd pay attention to him. He's somebody to watch out for. But yeah, Zolt is crazy. But like his performance against Perspective Philosophy, I couldn't do that. I actually agreed with Haas for most of that debate, minus like the burger thing. Like I had to on principle because I'm the moderator. I'm not offended by the burger thing. Even Lewis wasn't offended by the burger thing. Like where he was like holding a burger up to the camera while he was Lewis was giving his opening statement. I cut him off from that because it's like, this is like a hostile act that's distracting your opponent, and it's unethical to do in the context of the debate. I have a duty as a moderator to like bar that from happening, which was just stupid optically. I don't know why he did it, but I thought his argumentation was actually stronger. I thought his delivery was a little bit worse because he was too focused on hurting Lewis instead of showing his own knowledge of the topic. But I think when he actually focused on the arguments themselves, he performed really well. I think it was a lot more compelling. He does say that when he feels the other disrespects him, he'll resort to shouting. I've seen this as well. Has is somebody you can get along with swimmingly if you show him respect. He is super sensitive, and I'm sympathetic to this because I'm super sensitive to this too. He's super sensitive to when his interlocutor is sounding condescending or disrespectful. Super sensitive. If you talk to him like a person, you can get along with him just fine. Sorry for posting again, but I'm really interested in this question. How problematic is thinking of political quote-unquote solutions through social sciences lens instead of a political theory lens? For instance, I always support my arguments for equality with sociology. I have a tremendous degree of respect for sociologists. Some of the best political analysis I have seen has come from sociology departments. Again, like the discipline in question has no guarantee of quality by itself. But like, for example, this book here by Radhika Mangia, an Indian Marxist sociologist she's somewhere in Canada. But she wrote a book called Indian Migration and Empire, A Colonial Genealogy of the Modern State. Sounds like a super boring title. You read this, you will know so much about the history of the modern world and the structure of modern politics. This is one of the most important books ever, frankly, and almost nobody knows about it. It's scary. It's really scary, guys. You can go through life just not knowing a fraction of what's there. But in answer to your question, they have their place. What you crucially need to understand is that political theory concerns constitutions and like spatial relations and war and stuff like that. Sociology is actually a more appropriate discipline for understanding modern, let's say modern conditions, because of the interconnectedness of the modern world. We are governed more by sociological principles than we are by political ones. Or if we are governed by political ones more, the lines are very obscure. Does that make sense? Wait, which book is that again I missed? This is Radhika Mongia's Indian Migration and Empire. Let me put that up to the camera for you so you can see it. Super important book. I would say this is actually more important than Carl Schmitt's Nomads of the Earth. This is like so important. It takes so much work to know this stuff, which is why nobody does it. But yeah. Now, you asked an interesting question, actually, that I didn't actually get to, Music Combo. You asked, what is the problem, or how problematic is thinking of political solutions? I think thinking of solutions, when you think of solutions, you have concretized what the problem is. You have decided that this is the state of affairs. This is what needs to be changed. These are the categories we're working with. Now we're going to reshuffle things. Now we're going to move stuff around so things are better. The problem with thinking in terms of solutions, especially early on, before you've carefully formulated the problem, is that you are damning yourself almost categorically to basically just reifying the categories that you think you're fighting against, but you're really not. How do we find important books like that? Beats me. I got recommended that by a professor. I didn't find that book by myself. This is terrifying, guys. Stuff like this gets written like all over the place in obscure places. Nobody sees it. This person, she's got to be like 60 years old. This person spent an entire career reading books that we've never heard of, studying statistics that we've never seen. Yada, yada, yada. She writes a book that nobody's seen outside of like a very narrow part of academia. Like, I'm telling you this is the most important book ever. I don't know how I got it. There could be a million others that are a million times better that I've never seen. You determine whether or not to listen to me and like look at this based on how much I embarrass myself on screen. This is horrific, guys. We are so disposed towards just abject blindness. Have I read The Machiavellian Enterprise by De Alvarez? No. Although it sounds like something Professor Bates would recommend. Do I know Paulo Freire? I've heard the name. And let me tell you something. I work my ass off. I try really hard to know stuff. I don't know jack. I don't know anything. I've read almost every book on the shelf behind me. I don't know shit. It's really scary. I guarantee you, I have read more than Vosh has in a year than he has probably read in the past 5, and I couldn't beat him in a debate. Like, it's terrifying. It's really terrifying. This is why humility is super important. Like, I'll say this, like, I think Professor Flowers performed badly in this conversation. I think she misportrayed herself. I think. Like, I could be wrong. But I think by not, like, being aggressively, like, trying to pry out her actual meaning. And again, like, there are consequences to doing that badly. So maybe it was actually the right decision to be uncharitable to Professor Flowers. But Vosh is now blind to a world of thinking as a result. Blind. Doesn't know it exists. Have I read Concilians by Edward O. Wilson? No. No. I've read hundreds of books. I haven't read that. I don't even know about that. I bet a lot of people in this chat have too. It's scary. And a lot of people are perfectly willing to think that they know something without having read it directly. I was watching the Adam Friended interview with Doomer Politics the other day, and he brought up Stephen Hicks's Understanding Postmodernism. A lot of people read that book. It's slim. It's about as slim as this. Not as rigorous, though. By the way, I will say this. Marxist sociologists and Marxist theorists generally, they have a reputation in a lot of modern discourse as being, like, utopian and whatnot. Some of the most rigorous empiricists you've ever seen. I have nothing, like, whatever criticisms I may have for a lot of, like, online Marxist scholars blow me out of the water. Easily. Have I read The Art of the Deal? No, but my father has. That was a thing he read when he was, like, in his early 20s. That was funny. But, yeah. It's depressing, too. Like Marx. Some asshat named Carl Benjamin says that I've read Marx and he seemed reasonable in some cases, but he made a lot of mistakes. Marx spent decades of his life studying economics and history and political theory in England. Decades. Through immense hardship. He lost his favorite son during that time as well. Still did it. To be trashed by some trash like Sargon, it's... Some of the smartest people alive we only know through caricatures that don't represent a single thing they actually said. Niccolo Machiavelli. He has a reputation of being like the theorist of, like, devils, right? Old Nick. Like, you think of Machiavellian, the word Machiavellian, you think of, like, Frank Underwood. No. No, not at all. Machiavelli is, like a super morally concerned person. He's super concerned with virtue, or virtue. But his primary concern is, like, the health of the state, the health of the people, of the republic. He wants things to be good for people. He's not a theorist of, like, get into high office and just kill all your enemies. That's not what it's about. He measures the worth of a politician or a statesman by the world they make. But people use Machiavellian to refer to scoundrels. People think that they're clever and they're impressive because they can con people. No, they're hated by all of the people who are remembered by history. If they're remembered by history. There's a line from a letter Marx wrote to Engels in 1851, quote, I have gotten so far I imagine I could be done with all of this economic shit in 5 weeks. That's funny. Ever heard of pedagogy of the oppressed? Yes. Or is it pedagogy? It's pedagogy, right? Pedagogy of the oppressed? I've heard of that. I couldn't tell you what it is. 10 goddamn years doing nothing but reading books. I can't tell you what that is. And I think I have some modest powers in this area. I don't think I'm stupid. I don't think I'm a genius, but I'm not stupid. You can work your ass off and know nothing. It's terrifying. President Sunday, some people are really good at teaching you to hold certain ideas in contempt, e.g. Peterson and Marx and Pomos. I was very influenced by stuff like this. Yeah, so was I. So was I. I remember distinctly, actually. I've got a very good memory as a child. I remember saying, like, why can't we all just share stuff? Something in context. I think it was at a birthday party, actually. This was back when I was in Montreal. And I was like 5 years old. And I distinctly remember, because I didn't know the words, so it stuck out to me. It's like, oh, he's a communist, because they were joking about it, right? And so I had it ingrained in my head that communist meant stupid for my entire adult life. Which, of course, so did my parents, which is why they made that joke. And before reading a word of Marx, I knew that Marx worked in theory but not in practice. Whatever the hell that means, as if I had a coherent concept of the difference between theory and practice. What's my academic background? Bachelor's in political science, minor in religious studies. Couldn't get into a grad program to save my life. And I know more than most PhDs in political science, which is terrifying. Terrifying. By the way, one of the reasons why I really dislike book smarts is that one of the reasons for that is because somebody who comes from a wealthy background can just pay for someone like that to do their homework for them. That's why that's unethical. I didn't really take issue with that directly until he started using that to attack people in a very unjust way. But communism only works in villages with a small amount of people. I mean, hey, it's the only example we have. Anyways. Just curious, have you done any reading from the Renaissance humanists? Who do you mean? Do you mean like Hume? Or do you mean like Kant? I mean, I've read humanists. I've read Renaissance thinkers. You're thinking Machiavelli? Would he count? I don't know. Anyways, we've been here for a long time. Oh, good God, a very long time. Almost 3.5 hours. And you stuck around. Is this that entertaining? Are you enjoying this? I have no idea. I have no idea if this is enjoyable to listen to. I'm having fun, but I have no idea. I think it's also important to think often to yourself and form new connections with prior knowledge to create new knowledge on your own, of course, by still being careful to not draw spurious patterns. Yeah, I agree with that. It's important to keep... there's a phrase, I can't remember what it's from, but there's a book I read at some point. Maybe it was a novel, and it had some content in it characterizing... It might have been Dune, actually. I can't remember. I don't think it was Dune. It might have been Dune. It said something to the effect that death is rigid and life is flexible. When I look at an online figure like Vosh, one thing that sticks out to me about him is that he retains flexibility. He's like, people characterize like him forgetting things and going back on things as if that's like a character, as if that's a negative. That tells me that this guy responds to the world, right? He's not putting on a front. I think he does to a certain extent, insofar as he's sort of trained himself to gesticulate and to speak in a certain charismatic way. But I think there's a realness there. Whereas by contrast, let's compare him to like his obvious counterpart, Destiny. He has like a policy, right? He even characterizes his own psychology this way. He's concerned with consistency, and he has like policies that that determine how he will respond to certain groups categorically, how he'll respond to leftists, say. He will be motivated to treat certain people with uncharity and cruelty, even. He'll be motivated to aim to destroy certain people and to lift up others based on a predetermined set of conditions that he's determined arbitrarily. That's death. That's telling you there's not a person there anymore. There's a thing that a person once constructed that is now dominating the whole thing. Human beings who are free do stupid things because they want to. And they're still stupid things, but they also show that you're human. And I think what scares me about this platform is that a lot of people allow their souls to get consumed by whatever drives growth, builds connections that drive growth. Like, it's like, for me, when I think about the benefits of, like, say, establishing a viewer base that allows me to make money off of this, the benefit to me is that frees me to do nothing but research and talk about it. That's what I want. I'm like the Joker, right? I'm a man of simple tastes. I need my coffee, I need my books, and I need my computer. That's it. Give me those things and give me time, and I'm richer than a king as far as I'm concerned. I have no reason or inclination to play a cynical game to gain viewers that does damage to those other things, because that's the treasure. Is what I'm talking about a salient critique of capitalism? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to say that. No, planning isn't that human. Humans plan. However, if... how do I want to characterize this? Okay, so Aristotle, and I'm running off the skin of my teeth here. I think that's the expression. Aristotle argued that a citizen should have a certain amount of leisure time. They should have a certain amount of wealth and land and whatnot, so that when they made decisions, they were motivated by their reason, right? They were motivated by what they cared about, and they chose their actions based on their reason. The problem with someone who is deprived making decisions is that they are motivated by deprivation, by material wants, to make decisions that may be bad in the long run. So, I think what happens on this platform is people see people get wealthy. They see people get into a situation where they don't have to work. They don't have to labor anymore. They have a job with dignity. They have a person. They can speak to people. They have an intellectual career of some kind. And they want that. They want that freedom. But the process of attaining that freedom requires compromising all of those things if you're going to do so efficiently. Or at least, such has been the case. And so you have people descend into a purely cynical mode where they will falsely portray themselves and falsely portray other people and do very little of the things that a free person does, all for the sake of freeing themselves. And by the time they get there, they're gone. There's nothing left. They're just stomachs. I think, I'm in the awkward position. I guess I'm not really forced in this particular case. I'm just speaking off the cuff. But one of the things that I like about Vosh is that he's drunk off of his influence. And that's a really good thing, because he's drunk off of his influence because he thinks he's so great. He's not hungry. He's still in there. A lot of people, like Zanzi, very sincere person. He's not hungry. Now, he's smaller, but he's not hungry. He does stuff because he loves to do it. That's why I respect him, because he's a real person. He's kept his soul. Like, there's another being there when you're interacting with these people. Dylan Burns, I don't see a person there anymore. And not because he's not a human being with his own rights and worth and yada yada yada, but I see someone who's driven entirely by hunger for the growth of something extrinsic to himself. There's no longer... The man is gone. I think with a lot of these people, they're just gone. So, how the hell did we get here? We were supposed to be talking about Professor Flowers, and this video is still going to be called Professor Flowers. And we've been talking for 4 hours barely about that. Well, 3.5 hours. Anyways, why did I have a falling out with Professor Philosophy? God forbid he becomes a professor. Why did I have a falling out with perspective philosophy? I had a falling out with perspective philosophy, first of all, because his argumentation sucks. It's a really cynical reading of Hegel that is used primarily to push his brand, actually to the detriment of veganism, which I think there are strong ethical arguments for. And primarily, I think the strongest argument for veganism is just empathy for the animals we're just brutalizing in the process of eating meat. Or even just egg extraction or milk extraction. Like, it's creepy. it's actually really creepy, just the extent to which we just like mutilate often sentient beings that probably have a psychological experience very similar to us. It's actually terrifying. But that aside, the principal reason I had a falling out with Perspective Philosophy is because he boosted Doomer Politics' hit piece on Vosh, which was slanderous. It's not because it was a critique of Vosh. I critique Vosh. I will critique Vosh forever. But this was slander. It relied on like grasping examples that and lying about what those examples said. It was just a profoundly dishonest piece, motivated by nothing but spite and greed and desperation. And he boosted it because he hated somebody. And that it takes a low level of integrity to do that. I didn't have like the highest opinion of him, but I was willing to be charitable until then. I wouldn't mind talking to Professor Flowers. That'd be kind of interesting. I don't know what that'd be like. I don't know a whole lot about this topic. Again, like, I'm coming to this blind. Like, I've never read that book, White Privilege Behind You, or that other one with the foreign title I can't recall, but Essays on Socialism. I haven't read that. I can find them on LibGen. I just discovered LibGen this year. I've been, like, downloading stuff like crazy. Haven't read a dot of it. But, alright. I've been hogging the living room all night, and that's unfair to the other people here, so I'm gonna call off at this point. Thanks for responding. Responding to what? We've gotten through like a few minutes of this. I've been rambling off endlessly. I'm gonna have a reputation as a false advertiser. Can't even speak anymore. Good God. But once again, we have a bunch of new people here. In my living room, in front of my books that I keep to make people think I want to make them think I'm smart. But thanks for joining me. Thank you everybody for watching my stuff, for having interesting comments and questions. I really appreciate it, especially post-COVID. God, you never get to talk to anybody about this stuff anymore. Do you think people like Dylan Burns can get their soul back? I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things too. Like, I think you can lose your soul and then gain a new one. Like, I think you can. I think what happens is you get basically flattened and destroyed by the grind, by the hustle, and then you can reach a point of stability where you start to build those things up again. But I don't know what that looks like because I've never been there. I just don't know. But yeah. Anyways, welcome to everybody who's new. I'm gonna go now because I'm really fading fast. But thank you very much for joining me tonight, and go check out, and I'm not shilling for him. Again, I think he performed terribly in this conversation. I think he did Professor Flowers a disservice. But go check out Vosh's gaming stream, because it's probably going to be more positive than this. So, plus it's for a good cause, I think. Even if by the way, even if you're pro-life and you're against abortion and whatnot, Planned Parenthood does more than just that, right? Like they also help people with things like sexual health and with like things like birth control pills and stuff like that, which, you know, used properly prevent the need for abortions and things like that. So life's messy. Don't let an obsession with a naive view of what the good is make you cruel and therefore evil as a result. That's like the worst send off for a video ever. But yeah. Anyways, thanks everybody, and have a good night. Take care.